Hello, dear viewers. Support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it. And also, make sure you comment your thought. Now let's start the video. Kishley Rock 29-7 AC. Jin. She readied herself for the conversation to come, sitting in her room, and wondering if there was any other way to do this. When Jon had told her that he wanted to be there with her when she did it, Jaime had almost hugged the boy. He had so much to do, so many preparations to make, and yet for this, he was willing to take as much time as needed. Tommen would welcome his presence. She knew that her nephew saw Jon as who he wished to be. Ironic, she thought, since at one point the may have ended up as king himself. For Jenna, though she knew that this conversation wouldn't go like the last, that telling a boy he was no longer a prince, that his father wasn't his father, that was easy compared to telling him that his mother was dead. Tommen hadn't mourned Joffrey nor the life he'd had before or thought he was living now. In some ways, her nephew had welcomed it. But then she knew if she asked her boys if they wished to be a prince or a knight, then Walder and Tane would say the same thing. She closed her eyes briefly when she heard the knock on the door, and then got up and walked to it, opening it to find Jon and Tommen standing outside. "Aunt Jenna, Sir Jon says you wish to speak to me," Tommen said. "King Jacaerys, Tommen," she said, and the boy blushed and stumbled over saying it. Jon reaching out to place a hand onto his shoulder. "I'm Ser Tommen's knight and he my squire," Jon said, and she smiled when Tommen did, though hers was nowhere near as true as his. "Come in and take a seat, Tommen," she said, and nodded while looking to Jon, who walked in and sat down beside him. The young boy looking to her and Jon moving closer towards him. "Tommen, we've sent the ship to bring Morsula back. She'll be here within the week," Jon said, and though she'd agreed that this would be how they did it, she wondered now if they should have saved that for last. "She's not been hurt, has she?" her nephew asked softly. "No, Tommen, she hasn't, but, Tommen, your mother," she began, and she couldn't. The tears came, and she just couldn't. "Aunt Jaina?" Tommen said, and blessed the gods for making him do so. But feeling his arms hold her as he tried to offer comfort to her, shamed her a little. "Tommen, come sit with me," Jon said, as she tried to compose herself. But Tommen said, and she nodded to him while she walked to get a handkerchief to wipe her eyes, knowing that it was a pointless exercise as soon she'd be crying again. "Tommen," Jon said a little more firmly. Tommen did what he asked, and as she was coming back from wiping her eyes, she saw how close Jon sat, the concern clear in his eyes as he spoke to her nephew. "Tommen, we received some terrible news from King's Landing. News I wish I could keep from you. News about your mother," Jon said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sir Jon, did he hurt her?" Tommen asked worriedly. "Tommen, your mother Tommen, she's dead," Jon said, and how he managed to make it through the sentence she didn't know, glad though that he had. "No, she can't be." He wouldn't. "Sir Jon, please, Sir Jon," Tommen said, and then his voice was muffled as Jon grabbed him and pulled him to him. Jenna watching as her nephew sobbed against Jon's chest. How long they stayed that way, she couldn't tell. Tommen cried himself out so much that he actually fell asleep in Jon's arms. She watched as Jon lifted him from the ground and moved to the door, her nephew cradled against him, Jon looking to her and whispering he'd be back later to speak to her, before walking from the room. Once he'd gone, she moved to her table and poured herself a glass of wine and drank it down in one swallow, refilling the glass and drinking that one a little slower. She'd resolved to get very drunk this night, to dull the pain and heartache she felt in her chest. She'd mourned her niece, mourned the girl Cersei had been, the girl she sometimes saw when she looked at Joy, though only in looks and not temperament. Still, she mourned her. Someone had to. They had to remember Joanna's daughter and not what she had become, not Tywin's child. Just thinking of her brother made her grip the glass tight in her anger. He'd turned Cersei into the woman she had been, and she cursed him for it. She mourned the possibilities that had lain before her niece's feet, the roads not taken, and she tried not to think of the one she had. Kevin, too, mourned, as did Jaime and Tyrion in their own way. With Gerion, she couldn't tell. All of them, though, mourned her for the children, for Morsula and Tommen, her niece and nephew, grandniece and nephew by right. But to her, they were her niece and nephew, and that's how she thought of them. The same way she saw Martin and Willem, Lance and Janie, the same way she thought of Joy. She was sitting there drinking when the door opened, and as she turned to shout at Emmon to leave her alone, she heard Jon's voice. "Lady Jaina," he said softly, and she wondered, had he knocked, remembering now a sound she had thought was in her head. "Tommen?" she asked, worriedly. "He's asleep. I left Ghost with him," Jon said. "How is he, Jon?" "Tired, hurt, angry. He's as he should be. Yenna, I'll speak to him on the morrow, talk to him about my mother." Jon said, "Jon, you don't have to." "No, I do, Tyrion, too. He needs to be around people who've gone through it. I do know if Davin is coming with him when Tyrion returns." "I think so. Kieran said he wanted him here for when Morcella arrives, that they need to know the truth," she said, moving the glass from her hand, having no more wish to drink its contents. "I think we need to tell him, Jason and Tommen, we need to tell him that his father lives, that he's coming, he needs something, he needs to know he's not alone." "He's not alone," she said angrily. "I know that, gods, I didn't mean. It's just I was older than he was when Jaime told me the truth of who I was. When he did, the first thought I had wasn't that I was a prince, a king, or even that my uncle had lied to me. The first thought I had was that I was alone. My mother was gone. My father, too. It's not the same, Jaime, knowing that you have a family, and I knew I had one. All of you had made that clear," Jon said, and she smiled when he looked at her. "But you missed your parents?" she asked, and he nodded. "We'll tell him on the morrow," she said. He walked over and gave her a hug, and when he looked to the wine glass, she saw him frown, and had it been any other time, she'd have felt affronted, though now she kissed his cheek and bid him good night. "Jon, don't bring him with you," she said softly. "I'll leave it to him, Janet. He needs to make the choice. He'll be as safe with us as he would here." "I meant his father, Jon. Don't bring Davin with you, no matter what he says." I won't." King's Landing, 2087 AC. Richard. From the moment he'd set up this venture, this network, this had been what it had been leading to. Gathering information was important, and he and his lips had spread wide and far, and even the spider's web paled in comparison to the work he'd done. Now, though, it was time to spread information and not gather it, and Richard found himself looking forward to this even more. It started in Flea Bottom, the tale of the hidden prince, the son of the dragon, who was coming back to take his father's throne from the usurping stag and duplicitous falcon. Of how he'd hidden at first, and then how he'd come from the shadows, because he saw how his people suffered. How he couldn't sit by and watch as children were left cold and hungry, as their mothers had to suffer to put food on their table. Then it had developed into how he was coming now for the murdering stag, for the monster on the throne. But Robert's rage could only be answered by a dragon's justice. The bards and minstrels sang the songs, spoke the tale, and Richard's lips were there behind each and every one of them. For years we suffered here, while those on the throne feasted and wasted gold. They cared not whether there was food on my table, nor yours, nor our babes. The hidden dragon cared so much that he could hide no more. From the shadows and into the light, Jon Snow came. The White Wolf, the hidden dragon, Rhaegar's son, the true king. The woman shouted, "The White Wolf. The hidden dragon." Richard smiled as his lips did their work and melted back into the shadows himself. He had more to do, and time was of the essence. He knew that in the Vale, the Stormlands, in the Reach and the North, the Riverlands and the Crownlands, even in Dorne the tales were being spun. It was time to let more tales come into the light. The letters would be delivered to every keep in Westeros. The tale they'd tell were of a truth hidden for many years. While the king had sent his own truth out, Richard's was different. The truth of a lying stag and a falcon who dared fly too high. The tales he spun were of rebellion not for just cause, but for personal gain, not for a lost love, but for jealousy and spite. Some would ignore them, he knew, some would deny them, and some would believe them wholeheartedly. But they, along with the tales of Robert's rage, would spread, and if even one house or one force refused to answer Robert's call, then all would have been worth it. Make sure the townspeople hear this too. The hidden dragon is not the only song I'd have sung. Make sure they sing of the greedy falcon, the rutting stag, Richard said, and his man smiled as he took the letters and made his way from the house. "My orders, sir," the bard asked, and Richard smiled, hoping they'd get the chance to carry this one out. "I've set up a few of my lips near the fat man's manse. Go meet with them and see if there is a chance. Don't risk yourself, but if it comes, take it," he said, and Mark nodded. "I'll take my bow, you never know," Mark said. He spoke to the king that night, Jaime once again asking if he didn't feel it was time to come from the city, and Richard saying no. "I have more work to do here, my king. I and my lips are safe. Lomas follows the crumbs I leave for him, and those crumbs alone. To the brothel? Jaxed. Aye, he should be coming to that by week's end. Richard said, smiling as he looked at the glass candle. What will he find there? Jay asked. The truth. The question is, what will he do with it? Richard said, and there was a pause for a few moments, and he began to worry. The connection had been severed. You think he may not tell him? I think he will, my king, but even if should not, the song will be sung. The mockingbird who fooled a falcon. Richard laughed. Littlefinger? Jay asked a moment later. They sent him to the Reach, my king, seeking a betrothal as our small winged friend. He laughed as he heard the scoff from Jax. I wish him good fortune. I'll let Lady Olenna know. Jay said, Be safe. Save Sir Richard. Be safe. Keep your lips safe. For our work doesn't end when I take the throne, and I'd have you with me. You too, my king. Try not to risk too much, he said, and though he welcomed the laugh he got in return, it didn't assuage his worry. They were so close, and it all rested on the shoulders of a young boy. Should anything happen to him, then all was lost. Comforting as it was that he had 5 men guarding his back, not to mention a rather large white wolf, it was the dragon that Richard hoped the king would spend most of his time with. The Martells may have managed to take out a dragon by luck. Robert and Jon Arryn wouldn't be so fortunate, as Jane wasn't the only dragon that was hidden from them. Sir Richard, he's gone in, Davers said to him as he watched the brothel. Richard laying on the bed in the room they rented. How long ago? He asked. Only a moment, sir. I called you as soon as I saw him. Hungry? Davers asked, and Richard welcomed the hot soup, dipping the bread into it as he looked from the window. Just him? He asked. Aye, the man thinks himself usse. Davers said with a chuckle as Richard rolled his eyes. Richard actually quite liked Lomas. He was competent enough, a decent enough man who just happened to be serving a terrible king in hand. Something that many of his friends and he had also done. True, he had told himself he had served Rhaegar. But Daenerys had sat the throne, shaking that thought from his mind, for now he looked and ate the soup, smiling when after a couple of hours Lomas walked from the brothel ashen-faced. Let the games begin, he said as he stood up. He had more work to do and a king to see crowned. Dorn 737 AC. Oberyn Martell. He had barely been able to let the raven scroll out of his hands since he got it, finding himself reading it over and over again. To my family. The time has come to finally retake that which was stolen from us. From my brother, my sister, from their mother, our family should sit the throne by right. And though I cannot ever hope to replace my brother or sister in your hearts, I can make them proud of me and take their place on their throne. I can do what Axlia wished, what she hoped, and see the rest of those responsible pay for what they took from us. My brother and sister are with me. Rosiaging's readies to fly, and Aegon I carry deep in my heart. Axlia is with me, the woman who called me her son and who they stole the chance for me to ever meet. I ask you to be with them, to join me, to rise and see our family rise once again. Soon we're to be even more closely tied through Arianne and Tyrion. House Martell and House Targaryen are united once more. Though our shared blood, though I feel untied with my kin, I am not just my father's house, or my mother's. I am as Iada's named me, a son of Dorne. Let us be unbowed, unbent, unbroken, together, and let those who caused us so much pain know the true might of Dorne. Jaehaerys Targaryen, a son of Dorne. When he had shown his family they'd been as pleased as he was, Ellaria, even though worried about the war to come, had been proud to see Jaime name himself as he did. It took time to call the banners, and during that time, Dorne was more distant than he had ever been. That he stayed at the Water Gardens rather than come to Sunspear had forced Oberyn to decide to ride and speak to his brother, though before he got the chance, Elwacan and Ellaria asked to speak to him. So he made his way to Arianne's private solar and found her and Sir Daemon inside, along with his paramour. His former squire had taken some time to get used to the fact that Arianne was marrying, that the man she was marrying was Tyrion Lannister, and that his niece loved him, both taking a toll on Daemon, though he had stuck up for Tyrion when others had tried to run him down and had intervened when Tyrion's man had almost killed Drydalt. Niece, my love, he said, kissing first Arianne, and then Ellaria on the cheek. Uncle, please sit. I find myself in need of counsel. Arianne said, and he noticed she looked upset. Array? He asked, and she shook her head. The Dark Star, my prince, Sir Daemon said when no one else spoke. Who cares about a dead man, he said with a chuckle. But why is he dead, Oberyn? Illyria asked. Because he messed with my nephew and met the White Wolf, he said, laughing. A little more fully as he reached over to the bowl and grabbed some of the grapes. Uncle, this story, it makes no sense. You know it too. Arianne said. He did, and had it not been for the preparations he needed to make then, he'd have probably looked into it more. The Darkstar was a cunt and a man who couldn't be trusted. He was also one who did things that at times made no sense. Yet attacking Margaery Tyrell had been perplexing, even knowing that the reasons behind it were not something he could make no sense of. What he'd found out was that the Darkstar had traveled to King's Landing to compete in the melee that Jade had won. The next day, he'd tried to attack Margaery only to be met with Jade and Ghost, and that had been the end of Seer Girl Dane. Arianne had come up with a wild conspiracy theory that he'd dismissed, only for Illyria to not only agree but lay it out in a way that made some sense. In fact, had it been any man other than the Darkstar, then, even despite the ludicrous nature of it, Oberyn may have given it some thought. That it was Sir Gerald, though was where it all broke down. Doran would never seek to use that man, even was he complicit, as they suggested. I'll not listen to another word against my brother, Ari, he said, when he realized what was about to come. Uncle, Arianne said, her voice pleading. No, you were not there when I handed him Elizel's letter. You didn't see him react as a brother would. The questions he asked me, the reasons he gave me for why we'd support Jay, these were true, and so, no, I'll not listen to your wild speculations, he said as he moved to get up. Sit, my love, there is more you must hear, Aloria said. He looked at Aloria, at Daemon, and finally at Arianne, his niece's expression one he had never seen before and one he wasn't sure about. Taking his seat, he sat back, and it took a few moments for anyone to speak. Aloria finally deciding that it should be her. Did you know the Darkstar went to the Water Gardens? Aloria asked, and he shook his head. His brother would never allow the man there. Jane told me she and the Darkstar had been fucking for a moon or so when he received an invitation to the Water Gardens. She said she saw it herself before he burned it. Arianne said, Lady Bright is a fool. That she was fucking the Darkstar is evidence enough of that, he said, and saw Arianne nod her head, though he hadn't meant it, directed at his niece. She may be uncle, but she's not a liar, Arianne said. She told me this as we drank one night. She mourned him a little. So he went to the Water Gardens. That doesn't mean anything, he said. No, on its own it doesn't. Arianne, Illyria said, looking to her niece. When I told father that I wished to visit Jay to see him and reign to, he welcomed it, but he also suggested I seduce him, that I try to make him fall for me. Arianne said, he asked you this? No, uncle, not in so many words. You know what father is like. He made it clear, though. I cared not as I wished to see Tyrion again, but Arianne said, leaving the rest unsaid. So what? You think Doran did what? Tried to have Margaery Tyrell killed and used the Darkstar to do it? Oberyn said, laughing. Of all the ridiculous things. Why isn't he here, uncle? Why isn't my father here to speak to the bannermen to call them to arms? Yes, I know you'll lead our armies and I'll rule here. But for this? You don't find it strange that father wouldn't wish to be here for this, Arianne said. Enough. Not everything is a conspiracy, Ari. Gods, you really think? Enough, I say, he said, brushing off Illyria's arm when he walked from the room. He found no comfort in Illyria's arms that night, no sleep either, not truly. Even when he closed his eyes, they were filled with thoughts of his brother, of Elia, and of Jay. He rode hard the next day to the Water Gardens. The banners had been called, and soon the lords would make their choice, though he knew they'd follow him. Seeing the Water Gardens in front of him, he breathed deeply and rode in slowly, dismounting and finding his brother sitting by the pool. Oberyn, Doran said, surprised to see him. Brother, he said, taking a seat. What brings you here? Oberyn. I've come for you, brother. The lords are to arrive, and they need to see their prince. Our nephew has called for us, and I'd have you send Doran to war, he said, smiling as he looked at his brother. I am unwell, Oberyn. I cannot make the journey, Doran said. Surely for this brother, for Elia, for Aegon, for Rajuan, he said, his eyes on his brother all the time. Not even for them, Oberyn. It pains me deeply that I cannot truly. But no, not even for them, Doran said, and Oberyn nodded and smiled. I understand, brother. I'll ensure they leave knowing your heart, he said, and Doran smiled as Oberyn patted him on his shoulder before turning and walking from the room. The meeting that night was loud and boisterous, and despite one or two lords asking about Doran's absence, the consensus was quick and easy to reach. They would ride and fight for a son of Doran, for the man who had helped avenge Elia, Rhaenys, and Aegon. They would see the stag brought low, and as they left to call their men, Oberyn found his mind troubled once more. He didn't drink or celebrate with the others, instead sitting and playing Civus with Nymeria, his daughter making moves which caught even him by surprise. Though truthfully, Oberyn was barely concentrating on the game and just looking at the board instead. After losing for the second time, Nymeria called him out for his distraction, and Oberyn refused the third game. He called for Arianne and Illyria to meet with him and walked to the Solar. "Uncle?" Arianne asked. "I do not know if what you say is true. By the gods, I hope it's not. But we must prepare as if it is." Oberyn said. "Oberyn?" Illyria asked. "Our children are to be taken from the water gardens. I want a force loyal only to us close by should they need to be used." "You mean to remove my father?" Arianne asked worriedly. "I pray I won't need to, but he lied to me today. Lied about Elia, and I find myself questioning just how supportive of Jay he truly is. There is a reason he didn't wish to be here, one I cannot see. Games like this are not where my talents lie. We should prepare to remove him if needed, place him under house arrest, and cut off contact with the world if it comes to that. And hope it does not," Oberyn said. "You think he did it, don't you?" Arianne asked. "I hope for his sake he did not. I'm a viper, and I would make any who dared try to harm my love suffer greatly. Imagine what a dragon would do, Ari." He boarded the ship to Wye the next morning, he and his daughters, Illyria taking their youngest to Hellholt, while Arianne had Sarah Daemon gather up men they could trust. Oberyn had asked the knight to stay, and he had reluctantly agreed, despite wishing to stand by his side in the war to come. Though he had felt it best if he stayed with Arianne, not that she would be in any danger, but so she'd have men loyal to her and not Doran close by. Watching Sunspear fade from view, he walked to his cabin and began to look over battle plans. The Stormlands was Robert's greatest strength along with the Vale. Yet they'd never expect Dorne to attack, and Oberyn felt confident their spears would cause them big problems. Looking at the map, he wondered who among the Marcher Lords would turn their cloaks, if any. House Selmy, perhaps. House Dondarrion, if Jaehaerys was right. The fight itself may not come for some time. As he lay down in bed, he tried not to think on Doran and yet found his mind refusing to go anywhere else. If he was right, then he needed to speak to Jay, to speak to him before the truth outed. But if he was wrong, then he was creating a problem where there was none. What to do wasn't going to be resolved this night, and so he tried to sleep. Images of Ilia telling him that he knew the truth, that he knew what needed to be done, disturbing his dreams once more. King's Landing 2097 AC. Jon Arryn? The last 2 days had felt like years as the truth and what it meant began to hit home. They had gone from a decent position with a high chance of winning to a terrible one and victory fading, all in a single Raven's scroll. He'd even sent riders off after Pit-Air, hoping to catch him on the road before he arrived in the Reach. Not only was that avenue closed off to them now, but traveling there was dangerous, and he needed Pit-Air back here. Robert had ranted and raved, broken things, he'd reached for wine only to throw it against the wall, and he'd cried and blubbered like a newborn babe, all in the space of one night. The next morning, though, had been a shock to him, seeing him in the yard, the hammer being swung with more power and force than he'd seen it in years, and Jon had welcomed that. His rage was needed if they were to keep their heads. He hadn't been able to meet with the Illyrio yet. The sheer complexities of trying to find out what they now faced had taken up all of his time. The past 2 nights he'd spent looking over maps and working out figures, and it had taken him until this morning to actually use his brain, calling Gorman in after writing out the Raven scrolls and telling the man to ensure it was sent to everyone. "Everyone, my lord?" "Everyone," he said, almost shouting. "Let the realm know the truth of this bastard, and let Ned Stark's name be spoken for who he truly was, a usurping traitor who sought to place a bastard on the throne. A man with no honor who wished to use even the rape and murder of his sister to further his own ambitions. Lies, all of it. He knew what had been said in the Dragon's Scroll to be true. He knew it as he'd spent as much time searching it in his mind as he had trying to plan a way to keep his head. From the moment Ned had brought him into the Red Keep, how he'd not known then. Ned Stark fathering a bastard. Gods, what fools they'd all been. Why Jaime Lannister had taken him to Squire and why he'd been able to do all he had. Dragon supporters hidden in the shadows helping him, no doubt. Even his animosity to Edmure and the words he spoke before their duel, all now making far more sense to Jon. That he'd been played by a mere boy annoyed him until he saw it more clearly. It wasn't the boy who'd played him, it was those who held his strings. The Lannisters and the withered old cunt had found their own puppet king, and he envied them their choice. Though soon they, like he had, would find out that puppets can be difficult to control. He sighed as he looked at the map once more, and then he walked from the room, glad to be heading to a council meeting and wondering if Robert would attend. "His Grace?" he asked Sir Mandon when he saw him. "Inside, my lord," Mandon said, and he walked in to find Lomas and Robert sitting around the way too large table. "Gorman no longer welcome in these meetings." "Your Grace," he said with a bow. "Piss on that, Jon. Sit and tell me the worst," Robert asked. "The Reach, Robert, will not bring them on board now," he said. "I've offered to make the girl a fucking queen, Jon." Robert shouted. "A girl who already spends far too much time with—" He paused, not knowing which name would cause Robert the least aggravation. "The fucking dragon spawn, you're telling me they've been in on this together?" Robert said, his face red. "I believe so, Robert. They were always close. It's the only thing that makes sense that they'd promised her a throne before now. I'll fucking grind them into the ground, every last fucking rose, and then I'll piss all over their fucking bodies," Robert said. "The North, Robert," he said, and saw the look on Robert's face that he knew was hard to take for his former foster son. "I'll see him dead, Jon, mark my words. I'll see Ned Stark in the ground before I leave this world. I thought him a brother, fucking traitor. Just as bad as his fucking whore of a sister," Robert said, though his anger was quieter and lower now. "Your Grace, we have the North, the Reach, and the West against us. If these reports from your brother are true, then the Lords of the Narrow Sea haven't answered his call, and I'm hearing troubling whispers from the Riverlands," Lomas said. "What about the Riverlands?" he asked worriedly. "Some houses haven't risen, my lord. Some of the larger ones. I've even heard of houses displaying the dragon banner," Lomas said. "I fucking told you we should have driven them into the ground, all of them, every fucking house which rose for those fuckers should have been removed. You preached leniency. See what it gets us, Jon. See what it fucking gets us. I'll be lenient no more. By the time I'm done, the Rains of Castamere will be a fucking children's song," Robert said as he got up to leave. "My lord, there is one more thing, something most troubling," Lomas said, and Robert stopped his rant and looked to the Master of Whisperers. "Well, out with it then," Robert said. "I've been hearing whispers about the Master of Coin, disturbing whispers that at first I put down to just malicious gossip, but I can no longer. I've been looking into him. My lord, Petyr is a good man and true. You have no right to look into him, Lomas," he said angrily. "My lord, my purview is anything that affects the crown. And this affects the crown. It makes Lord Baelish untrustworthy, my lord. It calls into question everything he may do," Lomas said. "What the fuck did Littlefinger do?" Robert said, half angry and half curious. "He's been sleeping with Lady Lisa, your grace. He claims the babe is his own," Lomas said. "Lies, fucking lies. I'd have noticed if my wife was," he said as Robert laughed. Just like I did, face it, Jon. You never cared for her. And how much time did you actually spend with her?" Robert said, still smirking. "This is a lie. There's no truth to this," he said, shaking his head. "There are letters, my lord, and there's a song being sung in taverns," Lomas said, and Robert looked at the Master of Whisperers. "A song? The mockingbird who fooled a falcon," Lomas said. "Well, fucking gut them both of them," he said, storming from the room. He found her sitting in their chambers breastfeeding Robert, and he saw it clearly then. This was not his son, this could not be his son. That she never noticed his anger only proved what the king had said. Not only did he not care for her, but Lysa clearly didn't care for him either. "Guards, arrest her," he shouted, and his men came rushing in, grabbing Lysa and dragging Robert from her arms. "Jon? Petyr, I fucking know about you. And Petyr," he shouted, and her eyes told him the truth. "Jon, please, Robin, throw the two of them in the fucking cells. Make sure to put them in different ones," he said, taking some satisfaction in hearing his wives' screams as they were dragged from the room. He walked over and poured himself a drink and hoped that the men he sent to bring Petyr back found him. He needed him found, as he'd now discovered one man he wished to kill even more than Jon Snow. Dragonstone 2097 AC. "Stannis," He had waited as long as he could, and the bannermen had not come, and then the ravens came. Seeing the seal, he knew he was fucked, and Dragonstone was no longer safe for him and his family. So he called Davos in, and they began to plan what he needed to do, organizing his guard and making the Fury ready, walking around the keep and making sure that all the things he actually cared for were packed and ready to go. He tried not to dwell on the fact he was leaving Dragonstone with his tail between his legs, that he was joining his brother in a fight that not only did he fear they would not win, but the reasons for starting weren't ones he agreed with. Instead, it was as always duty that came first. The fleet would sail to King's Landing ready to be used how the king wished. He and his family, too, would head there, though it was Storm's End he wished to send them to. "You are sure, my lord? I could take them to Storm's End if you wish." Davos asked. "No, Sir Davos. I need to see them safe myself, and I must go to King's Landing. The Fury will set out with the household and with mummers, while Cersei, Shireen, and I will travel on the Black Betha with you." "You really think the lords of the Narrow Sea will try to take you?" Davos asked. "The dragon comes for us all, Davos. Those who follow will seek to fly too," he said, and Davos nodded and turned to leave him alone with his thoughts. Knowing they were coming and that Robert would need him as much as he'd have needed the men he'd bring, Stannis vowed he wouldn't be besieged again. He was his brother's heir, and there was no place for him to hide. Robert had seen to that, and he knew that when this war was done, he'd be alive or he and all his family would be no more. Standing in the chamber of the painted table, he looked down at the map and began to see battles play out. The Reach, the West, the North, the Lords of the Narrow Sea, Loyalists' houses, and Robert's rage, all of it combining to put them at a huge disadvantage. Stannis, though, knew one thing. Men wouldn't win this war, commanders would. He'd faced greater odds and seen victory before. The Iron Fleet had ruled the seas, and he'd beaten them, not because he had more ships, but because he had the will to see it done. "May my will not fail me in the days to come," he said, as he tumbled the stag over to its side. Dragonstone would belong to the dragons once more. He ate that night and actually enjoyed his food. Shireen was excited to be leaving, even though she loved Dragonstone. Excited to be traveling to King's Landing and to do so on Davos's ship. It shamed him somewhat that it would be the first time he'd brought her there. The first time he'd brought her anywhere. Truth be told, still, he enjoyed seeing her this way, even reaching out to touch her hand and trying to smile at her and his wife. "We leave under cover of night before the dawn," he said. And Cersei and Shireen both nodded. "To King's Landing, father?" Shireen asked. "Aye, to King's Landing," he said. The Fury and the rest of their ships left early that night. Stannis, Shireen, and Slays being smuggled out into a small hut where they waited. 3 knocks came to the door, and he opened it to see Sir Davos standing there waiting, and they hurried to the beach. The rowboat quickly taking them to the Black Betha. Quicker even than the Fury, the Black Betha took sail. And by the time they woke, Dragonstone was far behind them. "My lord," Davos said, handing him the Mirish Eye, and he looked to see the ships on Driftmark. "I knew he'd managed to leave in time." "The Lannister ship?" he said, handing the far eye back to Davos. "Aye, it seems you were right, my lord." Davos said, though Stannis took no comfort in it. "Aye," he said, walking away. He spent the next few days looking over maps, writing down figures, and wondering whether there was any point to anything he was doing. Best case, they were down 2-1, and worst, didn't bear thinking of. Their only hope would be to force the attack where they wished it to be, and he didn't know if he could do that, or if that was even possible. When they saw King's Landing in the distance, he welcomed the sight. Though he didn't look forward to being berated by his brother. Not that this one would go how Robert imagined, Stannis having his own words for his brother. Arriving at the Red Keep, he made sure Cease and Shireen were settled before heading to speak to his brother, finding him Jon Arryn, Lomas, and to his surprise Renslayer all waiting for him. "Rain away, did you, brother? That's not like you," Robert said mockingly. "I figured for the war to come, it'd be better if I were by your side than stuck besieged in my keep," he said. "They rose against you?" Jon asked, not needing to say who. "They were about to," he said, before turning to Robert. "Gods, what were you thinking?" "All of them, Robert. Have you heard what people are calling it?" Robert's rage. "You've turned half the realm against us, and that's not counting the ones the dragon has on his side. Fuck them all. They think that was rage. They'll soon see fucking rage." Robert said, "What are our plans?" "You're to go to Storm's End," Renslayer has called the banners, and they rally. "Sir Eldon holds command for now. but they need a Baratheon to lead them, and lead them, you will, brother, Robert said. What of you? He asked, Renfrey, his tone sharp.
I'm to rule, brother, to hold King's Landing in our brother's name, Rensley said with a smile.
Robert, John and I marched Jon heads to meet the Knights of the Vale, and I and the Crownland banners traveled to Duskendale. Robert said, confusing him. Duskendale? The Golden Company are to land there. You think the dragon spawn, the only one with surprises up his sleeve. Robert said, laughing. The seas, Robert? He asked, and was surprised when Robert didn't stop laughing. Jon, he asked, turning to the Falcon Lord. We've sent an offer to the Greyjoys. Reef into your heart's content, for the royal fleet is stood down. Jon said, and Stannis shook his head and looked at his brother in disgust. They ate as a family that night, well as close to a family as they ever were. Robert was charming and had Shireen laughing while Renly sat with that annoying smirk of his on his face. He noticed that his brother didn't drink and ate sparingly, and then looking more closely at him, he noticed that he'd lost some weight. He seemed firmer to him, and it was something he saw more clearly at sparring the next day. He's been doing this a lot? He asked Lomas. Each day, my lord, each day, Lomas said. He and most of the fleet set out for Storm's End the next day, Shireen and Saxley's by his side. His daughter had hoped to see more of the city, but Stannis wouldn't leave her in Renly's care. Storm's End had survived, he dragons once before, and Renly said the stores could last 2 years. Surely it'd be done by then, he thought. Though as they sailed and he looked at his daughter, he couldn't help but feel that once again he was on the wrong side, and he worried if this time he'd pay for it. King's Landing, 2097 AC. Illyrio. There had been rare moments of panic in Illyrio's life. When Sarah fell ill, he had panicked, and though there was nothing he could have done to save her, he still blamed not being clear in what he wished done as being a factor in her death. When Varys' reports had stopped coming, he had panicked briefly only to be able to right himself quickly. The letter from Jon Connington about Aegon had perhaps been his worst ever. Until now, that was. How had this happened? How had he not been aware of this? Had Varys kept it from him? How? The questions all fought each other in his head. No sooner had one popped up than another took its place, each of them leaving with either no answer or with the lack of a decent one. He had met the boy, and he was as far from a Targaryen as you could possibly be, in looks not in blood, a voice in his head said, and he tried to ignore it. To say this fucked up his plans was an understatement, and when the panic receded, it was soon replaced by anger. Though soon that too had gone, and worry was in its place. He didn't know what to do. That much was clear. He had no idea what he could do, so he did what he usually did when he couldn't make his mind up. He ate, and he ate a lot, gorging himself on many dishes and then burying himself in as many of his slaves as he could, all trying to clear his troubled mind. Magister. Another note from Lord Arryn, one of the servants said. Fine, Telefather. I wish to see him, he said, dressing and reading the note. Another request for a meeting, and he knew he'd have to answer that one soon. You wish to see me, Magister, Theodore said, sitting down. I did. I have a job for you. I need you to take ship to Braavos. You're to pay a visit to the House of Black and White, he said, and saw the men pale. Magister? Hand them this note. 2 million, you can go to 2 million if they'll see it done, he said, and Offwater nodded. He wondered if the amount was enough to kill a man. Yes, to kill a dragon, he didn't know. The House of Black and White was quite particular in which jobs they accepted, and their cost reflected that. The Golden Company couldn't be turned back. He knew that, as much as he may have wished to stop them, they were coming and the war would happen. That it was a far different war than he imagined couldn't be helped. The outcome was all that mattered. Later that day, he met with Jon Arryn and the king, and while it annoyed him, it did present an opportunity, and so he went with it. Even accepting the lies they told him about the odds they'd face, the North would never rise against them, Robert said. The Reach would come on board, Jon added. Did they really think him this foolish, he wondered? Had he not seen the boy with the rose? Had he not crowned her queen once already? As for the North, Illyrio had spent his whole life planning to make his son king, was spending his entire fortune to see Aegon crowned. Varys had been his best friend, and yet Illyrio would have taken his knife and plunged it into the man's chest, if it needed to be done to see Aegon deck his birthright. The North would rise for Jon Snow, for Jacaerys Targaryen, he thought, as he spat. Magister, are you sure about this? His steward said, and he nodded as the man readied his things. I am. We must travel with the king, he said. As you say, Magister, all will be ready within a day. Good. He walked to the window and looked over the Mains's gardens once more. He had intended to make this his base until Aegon took the throne, to sit here and wait for his son to come. The world Aegon was arriving to had changed so dramatically, though, that he had no choice but to change his plans. The Golden Company's orders, the king wishing to see them, the truth of who the king actually had on his side. He needed to be there to do what needed to be done himself, and he felt a little shudder down his spine at the thoughts. Ilio had planned this war out, planned to put his black dragon on the throne, and had thought he'd taken care of the red ones, only to find that he wasn't the only one who had a hidden dragon ready to be revealed, and as he looked out on the world beyond the window, he began to worry about that. Aegon's story was always going to be their biggest selling point, who he was, who they claimed him to be. A great story can move the world, and they had the best of all. Now, though, their story would seem like a poor imitation of another. That Jon Snow was known to the people of Westeros, that he'd made a name for himself already, only added to the problems. If he managed to tie up the houses that Ilio feared he already had, then even more so, who would come to their side? No one, while the boy lived and so he'd die, be it on the field at Robert Baratheon's hands, which was doubtful enough, at Aegon's hands, which would cause its own problems. Unless the narrative was changed, or at the hands of a faceless man, Jon Snow had to die. He will die. Illyrio said, turning as he walked to his bedside table and picked up the box, Sarah's hands inside it. He will die, my love. The Reach 2097 AC. Littlefinger. He hated riding on a horse, hated it, far preferred to travel in comfort in a carriage or wheelhouse. The way the king had looked at him when he'd asked his man to ready his, though, made it clear that it would not be appreciated for him to dally. So instead of traveling in comfort like the civilized man he was, Peter had been forced to travel like a savage. Each night he had climbed down off his horse and had felt the pains and aches in his body. Sleeping in the open didn't help either. This was not the life he was to live, soft sheets and a feathered bed with his love beside him. That was what he was owed by this world. Settling down for the night, he began to dream of her once more, just like he did each and every night. Blue eyes looking down on his sad hair moved from side to side, feeling every inch of himself inside her as she rode him, hearing her voice as she called out his name. "My lord?" one of his guards said, waking him from the pleasant dream. "What? Why are you waking me?" he asked angrily as he looked to the darkness of the night. "My lord," he sounded disturbed. "You were calling for someone," the guard said. "Someone? Did you hear a name?" he asked worriedly. "No, my lord. I'm well, just a bad dream. Don't wake me again," he said, both angrily and relieved that he'd not given away too much of himself. That was one of his biggest fears, that somehow, in some way, he'd give away too much of his desires, his true dreams. Luckily, he was surrounded by stupid men who thought themselves masters of the game, like Jon Arryn, or drunks who cared not, like the king. Yet, what he desired the most had been so close and had almost cost him everything. So happy had he been to see her that his mask had slipped and Lysa had noticed. It had forced him to be careful. More than that, it had forced him to hurt her, and for that he'd make sure Lysa would pay dearly. How he had not just grabbed her and ran straight to the scepter when she had all but asked him to marry her was beyond him, only that his instinct for survival had kicked in, and he, though overjoyed. He knew he couldn't do what his heart so longed for, not yet. "I've seen how you look at her, just like you did when we were children," Lysa said, as she combed her hair. "She is a friend, and yes, I'll admit when I was a boy I had a silly crush on her. But I'm a man now, Lysa, and I have a man's needs. It's you who I need, who I've always truly wanted," he said, kissing her cheek, and trying not to let the smile on her face annoy him more than it already did. "Good, because I'll not share you Petter, not with her, not with anyone," she said, looking to him, though her look was one which took him aback. "Nor I you, my love," he said, and was happy to see the smile return, though not the face it was on. It had forced him to be careful, to think out each move, and to realize that he couldn't hide how he felt from Lysa. She watched him far too closely. So he tried not to be near Cat. He'd hidden from her like a scared little boy, and it had taken a toll on his heart. To be denied that which was owed to you was nothing new to him, but to have the chance of it, to be able to reach out and touch it, but not, that had been hard. Only made harder by the offer she had made him, and he hoped that soon he could do as his heart desired. Breaking their fast, they mounted up, and he felt the pain in his arse as he moved on the saddle. Just riding for a few hours made him almost ready to collapse, and so when he saw the village up ahead, he cared not about the hurried nature of his mission. They would stop here and he'd sleep in a bed tonight. After having a warm bath which relieved his weary bones, he and his guards walked down to eat in the tavern, finding the place full and the meal to be a good one. "You very full this night?" one of his guards said to a serving girl. "Aye, we're celebrating," the girl said as Petter tuned her out. "Celebrating, I like to celebrate," the guard said, smiling at the girl, who smiled back at him. "Well, you'll enjoy the night here then. The dragons are back," the girl said, walking away, and Petter shook his head, thinking he'd misheard it. When the bard came, though, he found out he hadn't as the songs began to play. The hidden dragon began to be sung, and as the room cheered, Petter listened in horror. More so when the next song started, hoping his ears deceived him as the bard called this one, "The Greedy Falcon and the Rutting Stag." The words of each made it clear what happened, and yet Petter had to be certain. So he invited the bard to sit with them and bought the man a drink. "Interesting songs. I've not heard them before," Petter said, and the man nodded. "Aye, they're new to me too." A man came in the other night and began to sing them. Then he told us all the tale. Word came soon after that the banners are rising for the hidden dragon, the bard said, swallowing his ale. "The tale?" he asked as he ordered the man another drink. He rode hard that night, though his direction had changed, and even sore as he was, he rose early and rode hard the next day too. By the time he reached Tumbleton, it was clear he had been right to do so. The dragon banner waved high above House Footley's seat, and only for the fact that he wished to know more, he'd have ridden past. Instead, though they rode into the village and into the nearest tavern, his men enjoying the drink and food, and Petter listening to the talk around him. The songs were the same, and he knew then how much trouble they were in. Jon Snow wasn't a bastard wolf, not a deep dark stain that had shamed his beloved. He was a dragon, and this dragon was ready for war. As he sat there, his mind raced as he worked it out. The West he had, the reach too more than likely, the marriage he could offer far more attractive than the one Petter had been bringing them. The North too would rise for Jon Snow, which left them with what? The Riverlands would split, and he cursed himself for his part in that. The Vale would rise for Robert, as would the Stormlords. With the Golden Company, it gave them a chance, but he cared not for the odds. He drummed his fingers on the table as he tried to figure out the best advantage for him here. He could turn his cloak, but what did he have to offer? Nothing, which was why he'd turned back, knowing that Olenna would have seen him lose his head if he brought nothing to the table. As he was thinking, he heard it, and it caused him to panic. To actually, for the first time since he stood facing Brandon Stark, panic and almost wet himself. "What's that song?" he said, his voice almost screeching. "Oh, that! The mockingbird who fooled a falcon," the girl said, laughing as she danced away. He sat there and listened, and knew just how fucked he was. He couldn't go west if he did. Olenna would have his head. East now was out of the question too. Jon Arryn must know the truth by now if they were singing it so openly. What to do? Where to go? How to keep his head? The thoughts were jumbled and he needed to be elsewhere. Paying the coin and telling his guards to mount up, he rode slowly from the town, the cool night breeze and the quiet giving him time to think. "My lord?" one of his guards said after they'd gone a mile or two at walking pace. "We head for River Run," he said, as he turned his horse north. The plan clear in his head now, and he only hoped she'd not heard the mockingbird tale yet, that he could frame it his way first. Casterly Rock 2097 AC. Jaime Targaryen, bringing the Western Lords on board, had been easy and yet not. The initial excitement over declaring for him had soon developed into questions of what they would face, who their allies would be, and what their battle plans were. Speaking to Jaime and Tyrion, he knew also that he had things to do that couldn't be put off any longer. With the addition of Loras and the wearing of the white cloaks, he now had a true Kingsguard, and as Jaime said, it needed a Lord Commander. At one point that would have been Jaime, though he was far happier that he was in the role he was in now. He had needed his advice more and more the past few days. Tyrion, too, had become more involved and had brought up things that he'd not even thought of, and Jaime knew they, too, needed to be handled. This, though, would be his first official act as king, and as he sat in his solar, Jaime having insisted he needed one, he waited for the man to come in. "Sir Barristan, please sit," he said when Barristan walked in the door. "Your Grace," Barristan said, and yet didn't take a seat, making Jay smirk. "Please, sir, humor me," he said, and the bold smiled as he took his seat. "You wish to see me, Your Grace," Barristan said. "I did, sir. I've had a Kingsguard by my side for almost 9 years." "Sir," Lord Jaime, Jors, Walder, Arthur, yourself, and now Loras. I even had one who paid the ultimate price. Sir, Loras, he said, his voice soft as he thought back on his first protector. Ah, Sir Jors speaks of him often, your grace. He was a good man, sir, good and true, and I miss him greatly. As I said, I've had a Kingsguard since the moment Lord Yancey took me from Winterfell. To some, I've been a king from that moment, but there is a difference between then and now, he said, looking to the knight. Now you must act a king, Barristan said, and Jay nodded. Sure, Barristan, I would name you Lord Commander of my Kingsguard. Jake said, standing up, which Barristan did almost immediately. Your Grace, Sir Arthur, Barristan said. Even were it not your rightful place, Sir Barristan, based on your service, it's the place that Sir Arthur feels best suited to you. You are my choice, sirrah. Do you accept? With great honor and humility, my king, Barristan said. From now on, I'll leave all matters regarding the Kingsguard to you, sir. There in time will be changes, but they'll be discussed between us. Go. I believe your brothers await you, he said, and Barristan turned and looked back at him, as if to say something before turning back and leaving the room. Later that day, he walked to his first war meeting, and he could tell the lords wondered why it was being held in the vaults. The room they'd cleared was large, and it had needed to be as most of the lords of the West had come, and he intended to tell them many truths this day. Behind him, Ser Darthur and Ser Jars walked, Ser Barristan waiting inside the room, along with Jaime and Tyrion. My lords, please sit. We've much to discuss, he said as he walked into the room, looking around to see Lord Brax and then Lord Craighall looking to him eagerly. Your Grace, Jaime said. And Jane tried not to chuckle. Barely anyone called him his name in public anymore. My lords, before we begin to discuss direct battle plans, my hand has an announcement to make about the makeup of our war council, he said, and James stood up. Lord Tydos Brax, Lord Roland Craighall, Lord Daemon Marbrand, and myself, His Grace, and Sir Barristan Selmy, the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, will make up the war council. Others will be invited to learn of our plans also. Yemi said, and he watched as the lords seemed relatively pleased by this, other than one or two who were a little put out. My lords, my uncle has called his banners and the north has risen. House Tyrell has called its banners and the reach has risen. The lords of the narrow sea have called their banners and they too have risen, and I've now received word from Prince Oberyn, Dorne has risen for us also. We have houses in the Riverlands who've risen to my banner, my lords, now we rise to meet with our allies and to strike down our enemies. He said, and he could see the surprise on some faces, Lord Marbrand the one to raise the question. Dorne, your grace. My brother and sister were of Dorming, my lord, and their mother named me as her son, Prince Oberyn. Prince Doran are my kin, and I consider them my uncles, and they likewise me, their nephew. Doran rises to see their kin on the throne, he said. And the lord nodded. Can we be sure of the reach, your grace? Lord Bainfort said. Lady Margaery is to be my wife, my lord. House Tyrell has sworn to my side, as has House Tyrell. The reach rises for us, he said, and the lord and some others seemed pleased enough by that. My lords, my nephew and I bid you join us. There is something you should see, Talierin said, and they moved towards the doors, the lords reluctantly following them and speaking to each other as they walked out onto the beach. My lords of the West, by sea we have the advantage, by land we have the numbers, and by air we have, he paused, as Raxenix and Lygaron came into view, the two dragons flying over the lords, some of who ducked and hit the ground. Dragons, Tyrion added, smiling. They sat in the meeting that evening, looking over the maps, Lord Brax, Lord Craighall, Lord Marbrand, Arthur ostensibly as his guard, though Jay wished him there, and Barristan as a member of the council. Jaime, Tyrion, Kevin, and Tyrion, who'd arrived that day, all sat around the table, and Jaime had told him that as king he had to be the one to lay out their plans. My lords, the Riverlands is where this war will be fought, just as it always is. The lords of the Vale and the Riverlands forces that are loyal to House Tully and the usurper's own forces will all try to march and join up, and we must see it doesn't happen, just as they will try and do the same with us, he said. Looking around the table, he watched as Roland looked to the Golden Tooth, and as Tydos did the same. We will rally our allies in the Riverlands and take the roads. Here, here, and here, he said, pointing to the map. Walder Frey, Daemon asked. Will do what he always does, Nothing, and then he'll try to wring the highest price he can for it, he said to laughs. The Reach will be joined by the Dornish army and move to the Stormlands. Without them, Robert is even worse off than he already is. If we can also stop the Knights of the Vale from joining, then we have them where we wish. Why not just fly the dragons, your grace? We all know what happened in the Field of Fire. A sitting army is no match for a dragon. Tytos said, The dragons are the hammer, my lord, but men are the anvil that the armies will be broken on. I can use the dragons, and I will, but they won't win us this war. They'll just make sure we don't lose, he said to Nods. You will use them, though, Daemon asked. As sparingly as I can, my lord. I don't wish to be remembered as a man who burned men to death. One of those in my family is enough for many lifetimes. If needs must, though, and I am forced to use them to their full strengths, then I will, but I believe this works better. We'll break them together, and fear of the dragons can perhaps be just as effective as their flames themselves, he said, and saw Barristan look to Jaime and nod. I think we're done for now, my lords. Let's rest. We ride soon, Jaime said. And the lords left. Loras and Jars walking into the room as Jar sat down. You did that well, Garion said. That was easy, my lord. The hard part comes next. Now I have to go and tell Joy I'm leaving, he said to a laugh from Jaren. Jane, Riverrun, I want to lead our forces against it. Jaren said when they stopped. My lord, I have my reasons. Will you give me this command? Garion asked, and Jay looked to Jaime, who nodded. You have it. Take Lord Krekel and Sir Adam with you, he said, and Jarion smiled as he stood up. Jarion, take no chances and take a damn bird, he said to more laughs. Now, what else have we to do here this night? Tyrion said, and Jane took out the piece of paper and handed it to his uncle. Your legitimization papers, Uncle Tyrion Targaryen, Prince of the Seven Kingdoms. It has a nice ring to it, don't you think? He said, and saw the look Tyrion gave him, happy, and yet a little sad that he was no longer a Lannister by name. Remember Tyrion, a dragon and a lion, he said, and saw his uncle relax as he took out the next piece of paper. My will, he said, and heard Loras gasp. Don't worry, I've no intent of dying. I've far too much work to do for that, he said as Loras relaxed. Daenerys, Tyrion said, and he nodded. I'd mean you uncle, truly. I care not for what people would say. Bastard or trueborn is just a load of horseshit. You are my uncle, my blood, and I'd name you, but what was done to Rhaegar was wrong and done by men who thought a woman couldn't lead. All of us in this room know the strength of the women in our lives. Dany is heir by right of blood, and that she's a woman makes no difference, he said, and saw the nods. After the meeting, he walked from the room and out onto the beach, Loras and Walder beside him. Jurchens would guard his uncle and would be joined by Ser Richard Horp if he wished to keep his cloak. Barristan having come to speak to him about the man, and Jah having no need of convincing, what he and Serchens had done was proof enough of his worth. Tyrion had laughed when he suggested Bronn, saying not only was he not suited to the ideals of the Kingsguard, but there was no way in the Seven Hells he'd stick to the chastity vow. He had known that, and it hadn't been a true suggestion, more one based on him knowing how comfortable around Bronn his uncle was, and how capable the man himself could be. Durant had shown that in spades, he thought as he watched his sister and son dip down into the water. They are in a playful mood tonight, Lord said from behind him. They know they'll be flying soon. As will I, he said. You're really taking to the sky? Loras asked. I need to fly, Loras, north to the Reach, and this, he said, holding up the note. Can she take two, my king? Loras asked, and he turned to look at him. You wish to come? He asked, and his friend nodded. Seddon? We won't be going right away, will we? Loras asked, and Jade chuckled. He spent the night with his sister as he had most nights, Rhaenys and worried, and excited to be taking their throne back. Though it was the note he held in his hand that had her speaking animatedly to him that night. We would play on the cliffs. Jane, father, mother, and I. They'd let me run and then they'd hold me as we looked out onto the sea. She said softly. I've seen it in our dreams, Ray. Seen it from afar to see it for true. Gods, he said. It is our home where we belong, Jah. More so than King's Landing or Winterfell or Casterly Rock. Dragonstone is our home, and I wish to see our banner fly over it once more. To share it with my brother, she said, and he leaned in against her. And him? He said softly, looking to Lygaron, who slept beside them. He wants it too, though lesser, not the same as you or I, she said, and he nodded at that. The next couple of days were hard, letting Tommen know about his mother and then that he'd have to leave for a little while. Jay telling him that he needed to stay and see his sister, and finally telling him the truth about his father, all of it taking a lot out of the boy. When he had come to him and they'd spoken about his own mother, when he had Tyrion speak about Joanna, it seemed to have some effect, though it was telling him that he'd march with the army and they'd meet up soon, which had the most. All those conversations, though, paled into comparison with how nervous he felt about this one, walking into the room and seeing her sitting combing her hair and being almost in awe at how much she'd grown. In the last year, she'd grown taller and was now almost of a height with Sansa, and the little girl he remembered was almost a distant memory, until she looked at him, or she smiled, and then she was his joy once more. "You're leaving," she said, and he nodded as he sat down on the bed. I must," he said as she turned to look at him through the looking glass rather than directly. "Must you?" she said, almost angrily. "All my life has been leading to this joy. My mother, my father, my sister and brother, their mother. This is for them. It's for my grandfather and uncles, my grandmother, for all they've taken from me," he said. "I don't want you to go," she said softly. "I know. Joy, sit with me, please," he said. And it took a moment for her to get up and walk over to him, but soon she was sitting on the bed beside him. He reached out and took her hand in his, raising it to his lips and kissing it. Feeling her lean into him, he put his arm around her shoulder and sat there for a moment, trying to come up with the words to say. "When I first came here, I was excited, you know, a new place, a different start. Training with Jaime and meeting everyone. But I was alone too. Everyone made me welcome, but I'd left my family behind, and I was alone. Then one day, not long after arriving, I met a little girl, and I wasn't alone anymore. I've never been alone since that day, Joy. Since the day I met you," he said. She wrapped her arms around him, and he held her tightly. She didn't cry, and that she was able to not, while he felt his own eyes well up, showed just how much she'd grown. "You are my little sister, now and always, my princess, and I swear it on the old gods and the new. I'll return, and you and I will ride apples in winter. We'll have many enters to come, Joy. Do you believe me?" he asked. "I believe you," she said as he kissed her cheek. "I love you, Usse," he said, making her smile a little. "Love you, Jan," she said, back as he hugged her once more. The next morning, he rode to Gendry and collected his armor. Looking at it, he had been overwhelmed at just how right he made it. It was his father's armor reborn, though the Valyrian steel was something he wished his father had been able to wear. Thanking the boy and riding back, he found himself not looking forward to the dinner that night. Tyrion had already set off, and soon the rest of the army would be doing likewise. Tyrion leaving with Rhaegar to ride with one half, while Jaime left with the other. He said his goodbyes that night, as he intended to leave early the next morning. Daisy hugging him, and he felt the bump in her stomach, the pregnancy far more pronounced now, and he cursed the timing of this war. Janie almost had him in tears, once more, as did Ashara, Cregan, having left with Jirian and Dusk. He looked to Brienne and Satin. He'd given Loras the last few nights off so he could spend time with his love, and Brienne would be riding with Walder and Barristan at Jaime's side. Others he'd see sooner rather than later. Willem was squired now to Sir Barristan and Walder to Sir Jorah's. Far too many people he cared about, though, would be marching to war, and he tried not to think of it as he looked them over, his eyes going to his little sister, and he smiled to see her keep a hold of her emotions. The not-so-little girl doing a far better job of it than he was once more. After a troubled night's sleep, he woke the next morning and ready to leave, only for Jaime to be waiting for him and dragging him to a spar. "I win," Jaime said, taking their match 5-3. "One day, Jaime, one day," he said with a smile, which Jaime returned. "I'll see you win," Jaime asked. "I have to fly north, and then to the Reach, and then on to Dragonstone. A moon at most. I'll not stay away long," he said as Jaime handed him the water. "See that you don't. The Golden Tooth?" Jaime asked. "The Golden Tooth," he said, before he put the mug down. "Jaime, Be safe, my king. Be safe." "You too, Jaime," he said, and was surprised by the embrace that Jaime caught him in, though he was glad of it. "Remember the birds, Jaime," he said, and Jaime chuckled. "Aye, now go! The sooner you leave, the sooner you'll be back." He turned to walk away, stopped, and went to turn back to tell him all he meant to speak to him and let him know, and he couldn't find the words. There was too many, and yet he couldn't find them all, deciding on the simplest in the end. "Jaime, you're the father I choose. Always," he said, and saw the nod from Jaime. the words not needing to be spoken back as he turned and walked away. Tyrion stood on the beach, and he told him to use Rhaegar only if he must. His uncle was ready for the war to come, and even more so for the marriage to come after it. As he looked at Satin and Loras saying their goodbyes, he turned to Barristan and whispered in his ear. Before watching as Arthur and then Loras climbed up on Rhaenys's back, the saddle allowing them both to sit a little more comfortably. "Goes to me," he said as he walked to where Rhaegar was standing, telling his son he'd see him soon and then turning to climb onto Rhaenys's back. He tried not to laugh as Ghost made all of them look like uncoordinated when the wolf ran and climbed up before sitting down on the fur in front of the saddle. Once he was sure everyone was comfortable, he closed his eyes and took a moment before opening them again. "Sevegan Rhaenys," he said as the dragon took to the sky. "The war for the throne finally at hand. Winterfell 27 AC. The Blackfish." He had been called into Ned's solar not long after arriving at Winterfell, and handed a letter that had been written by Cat. Reading it, he was surprised to see his niece had basically given her blessing for Ned to marry again. Sure, she hadn't explicitly said so, but it was clear from her words that she meant that, handing the letter back, he looked to his good nephew, or was that former good nephew. "This changes things between me and your family, Brendan, but I hope not between us," Ned said, looking back at him, his eyes focused on his face. "I cannot say I'm not a little saddened by this, Ned, but my niece has made her choice, and I see it as no fault of yours." "I thank you for that, Brendan. I feel though it's time we had a conversation that's long overdue," Ned said, and Brendan wondered where he was going with this. "Very well, Cat, Brendan, she and your nephew, I believe you know what they tried to do," Ned said, and then raised his hand when Brendan went to interrupt. "I know, Brendan, that you were not a part of, nor played any role in any of it whatsoever." "They are my kin, Ned." I know," he said, embarrassed. Not at his admission, but at what they'd done. "I suspected it with Cat. Gods, I didn't wish to, but I suspected it all the same. She and Pater Baelish had shared letters, the things he said to her regarding Jon, whether she'd always have hated the boy anyway or not. Those letters only helped fuel that hatred," Ned said, and Brendan thought about asking to see the letters, but thought better of it. "I never knew they'd kept in touch," he said, and Ned snorted. "Would that were all it was? Each time we'd hear of what Jon did, what he accomplished, things would get worse between Cat and I. My not wishing to punish the lad for what she saw as him trying to make a name for himself in order that he could take Winterfell. At first, that was it, and whether it was just this fear or her hatred of the boy, I can't be certain. Only that it festered Brendan, and I couldn't cut the wound out," Ned said sadly. She sent me letters in the Vale demanded I do something about the lad. I'd seen him but the once in Lannisport, and that boy would never take Winterfell. He'd never try," Brendan said, and saw the soft smile on Ned's face. When he came back here, God's Brendan to see him with Sansa, Arya, even Robb, he showed me how far I'd let my family slip. A boy of 10 days showed me and Cat hated him even more for it. The fosterings was his idea. Did you know?" "I didn't," Brendan said. They were. He even suggested taking Bran as his squire, though once again Cat saw danger where there was none. "She argued with me on the fostering about Bran, though I'm glad he's squaring with you," Ned said. He watched as Ned grabbed a small mug and took some ice from it, placing it into larger mugs before he then poured ale over it and handed him one of the mugs. Brendan glad of the cool drink, even this far north. "That was his idea," Ned said, smiling. "Ice," he asked. "To use it for this, for storing food. We're shipping it around Westeros and off into Essos. Wintertown, Bear Island, White Harbor. Most of my bannermen are benefiting because of Jon." "You heard what he did with his winnings in King's Landing?" Ned asked. "No. He gave them up to feed the poor Brendan, convinced the Tyrells to match it. I've spoken to some of those who've come north from Flea Bottom. You should listen to what they say of him," Ned said, his pride clear. "He's a good lad, Ned," he said. "Then why did your niece and nephew try to have him killed?" Ned said angrily, slamming his hand on the table. "I don't know, Ned. I only found out after, and even then I couldn't be certain, so I warned them, and well, forgive me, Brendan, There's nothing to forgive. There's more I need to speak to you on, but now is not the time, Brendan. Things are going to change. You need to be aware of this," Ned said. After he left, he got an ominous feeling about the last words Ned had spoken, and found himself in the Sept in Wintertown, praying for the first time in many years. The lad himself arrived surprisingly for the wedding, and Brynden watched as he spent time with his family, with the Tyrell girl, and how happy he seemed at the wedding itself. When Bran asked him to stay a while longer, he did, and they were in the process of getting ready to actually leave when things changed dramatically. First, Ned came to see him once more, this time basically to tell him that Bran couldn't leave with him and that if he wished, he could stay with him. "Why, Ned?" he asked. "I need my son here. There must always be a Stark in Winterfell, and it falls to Bran," Ned said. "So this isn't about me?" he asked, worried that over time Ned had decided to take his grandnephew from him. "You and I are on good terms, Brynden. I hold you no more responsible for your family than I hold Jon for how they think of him. But things are about to change, and I wish I could give you more, but stay. Listen, and we'll talk," Ned said. Very well. He did as he was asked, and to say things were changing was an understatement of epic proportions. First came news from King's Landing, the king calling the banners, and Brynden, if it hadn't been for Bran, would have mounted up and ridden off. The Knights of the Vale would ride, and it was his place to ride by their side, to ride for his king. Yet he felt that he was the only one who felt that, as Ned didn't seem to be keen to rise for Robert, and he wondered why that was. He killed the queen and her boy, claimed her an adulteress, and the boy a bastard. Now apparently he seeks her other son and daughter's head, and intends to march on Casterly Rock. He heard one of the guards say. "He wishes us to rise against the West," the other asked. "He may wish it. I don't think he'll see it fulfilled," the first guard said. "The White Wolf," the other said, and both men chuckled. The White Wolf, Jon Snow, would they not rise against the West because he was a hostage? No, Jaime Lannister doted on the lad by all accounts, thought him family. He'd not make him a hostage. Then what? Was it that they were more allied with the West than Robert? Surely not. Ned Stark cared not for coin, and Robert was as close to a brother to the man as could be. With Jon Arryn involved also, the North would have to rise for them, wouldn't they? He was pleased to see the banners called, feeling that he'd be able to ride with them to meet up with the Knights of the Vale, though more and more news had come from King's Landing. Robert's rage at was being called, and Brynden was disgusted by what he heard. Beating a boy to death in front of his mother, killing servants and guards alike, putting their heads on spikes to show off what you'd done. He liked it not, and it was clear that Ned Stark and some of the lords who'd arrived felt the same way too. Uncle Brynden. Bran called, and he turned to look at the lad, ready to start their day's sparring. "You ready, Bran?" he asked, and the boy nodded. This at least allowed his mind some rest, made him feel somewhat content in the changed world he now found himself in. His charge was coming along well, martially, and in his studies was diligent, apart from a brief time when he seemed distracted and upset. So much so that Brynden had gone to Ned and found out the reason why. He'd actually argued with the man over telling him the idea of the boy knowing such things about his mother, not one he agreed with. "I'll keep no secrets from my children. None that are mine to tell anyway," Ned said cryptically. "You'll make him hate his mother," he said angrily. "I'd give him leave to make his own mind up, but at least he'll know who she is. Brynden, he'll know the truth of her." He'd not agreed with Ned, but Bran had seemed to get over it, and had even asked after his mother once or twice, so he accepted it and moved on. He began once again to concentrate on his own work with the boy. They were finishing their spar when Jory Castle walked over, the man's usually smiling face replaced by a far more serious one. "Lord Bran, I believe your father wishes to speak to you." "Sir Brynden, a word," Jory said, and Bran looked to him, and Brynden nodded to him, allowing him to run off. "Jory?" "A meeting's been called for tonight." "Sir Brynden, Lord Stark has asked everyone to attend," Jory said. "Everyone?" he asked. "Aye, all the lords, their most trusted men, everyone," Jory said before walking away. Standing in the Godswood later that night, he wished these were his gods, that he could, as he'd seen countless Northmen do, just come and kneel and pray to this damn tree. He'd seen the peace that came over them when they did so, and they'd rise after prayer, as if their worries were no more. For Brynden, though he couldn't remove his worries, he couldn't even begin to. Jon Snow was a lie, and his family was fucked. That the lad may not be vengeful and cared for his siblings may be all that, let them keep their heads. This war was a foregone conclusion. The forces against Robert were far too large. The Northwest, Reach, the Loyalist houses, and those who'd turned back to the dragons as soon as they knew Rhaegar's son lived. He could see it clearly, and there was nothing to be done about it, something which filled him with anger and despair. "You have questions," he heard Ned's voice from behind him. turning to see the man in the gray wolf that was almost always by his side. "You could have told her, Ned," he said bitterly. "Could I? To what end?" She hated him. "Brynden, nothing would have changed that. Given the letters she shared with Baelish, she'd have told him, and then what? Would he have kept it to himself, or would Robert have marched here to take his life? Would he have sent assassins as he did after his family? Would he have come under false pretenses, and I'd have had to watch as more of my family died because he couldn't face the truth?" Ned said, his voice soft, but his anger clear. "Had she known," Brynden said, "then she'd have loved him like he was her own, and all would have been well. Do you think I've not thought that I've not been where you are? The truth of the matter is, she wouldn't have changed. Instead of thinking him a bastard threat to our children, she'd have thought him a threat based on his blood. Only she'd have had a way to see him gone, Brynden. A way to see him dead. Tell me truly, do you think she'd have used it?" He said nothing, looking instead at the white bark of the tree and shaking his head. Everything Ned said made sense, and yet he felt his anger and annoyance rise, his worry for his kin, for his friends in the Vale. "What will he do with them?" "I don't know, Brynden. Cat is his brother's mother, his sister's mother, and Jaime Sierres loves his family. He'll not see her dead. And more, I truly can't say, though, at best, it'll be the wall. Your house will end, Brynden. The Tully name no more, though the line will live on with Bran as Lord of Riverrun," Ned said. "Lord Paramount?" he asked, and Ned shook his head. "No." "What am I to do?" he asked, his voice cracking. "I cannot tell you, only you know what's right for you. Bran will need you, Brynden. He's the last hope for your blood, if not your house. Isn't that why you came here?" Ned said, turning to walk away. His sleep was troubled that night. Unsurprisingly, little things he'd seen and dismissed coming back to him now, he'd recognized it in Jon Snow. He knew that now, recognized the father and the son, and yet not made the connection. As he sat up in the bed and dressed, he began to laugh, saw Richard's words running through his head. "You fought on the wrong side once, Brynden. Even now, you don't know the truth of it. Family, duty, honor, all come into play, not just one. The dragons will return. You should try to be sure to be on their good side when they do. I wish you good fortune in your travels, Brynden. May the road you find be the right one." He broke his fast with his grandnephew and stood up, motioning to the boy to join him, walking from the hall to the sparring yard. Once there, he grabbed the swords and handed one to Bran, looking to the boy and noticing his nervous expression. "Come, Bran, we must practice. You're to be lord while your father's away, and we won't have as much time to do this then." Brynden said, "Oui," Bran asked. "All right, oui. You think I'd leave you here all alone?" he said with a chuckle. "No," Bran said, smiling now. As the spar began, Brynden began to smile. Bran was his family. To prepare him for the life he had ahead of him was his duty, and to raise him to be a true knight would redeem their honor. The North, 207 AC. Arthur, he tried not to laugh, truly, he did, but to find someone less comfortable on a dragon's back than himself was funny to him. So when they landed in the wide open fields just south of the Neck, Arthur found himself laughing at how quickly Loras dismounted, his youngest brother now off stretching his legs while Arthur and the king shook their head. As Ghost woke up, the wolf had actually slept through the flight, and Arthur found himself a little jealous of him for it. Looking at his king, Arthur was glad they'd not landed near the Trident. He, Barristan, and Jaime had all found it hard to look at the armor Jade wore and not think of his father. The color, the rubies on the chest, that it was Valyrian steel, was the only thing which marked it as not being Rhaegar's actual armor. Though Jay explained that was the point. "Let him think me a specter from the past. Let them believe my father has come again. It's in his name I seek justice, his and my mother's." "Your family? No, they deserve far more than justice, Sir Arthur. They deserve far more than vengeance. For them, I intend to bring Robert and Jon Arryn a reckoning," Jane said, determinedly. After stretching their legs and drinking some water, they climbed back up on Rhaenix's back. Ghost once again putting them to shame with how easily he managed it. Within a heartbeat, they were flying once again, and as they flew over the twins, Jay pointed down. Arthur looking to see no assembly of men, just as Jay had predicted. He smiled when they flew over Seagard, and they saw the three-headed dragon flying high. House Mallister having declared for the true king, it seemed. Soon Winterfell was in sight, and Jay flew Rhaenix once again into the Wolf's Wood, landing where they had before, and while he, Loras and Ghost, dismounted, Jie stayed a little longer before he did likewise, walking to the dragon's head to speak to his sister and bid her farewell. The walk to the keep took only a few minutes, and Loras asked Jie why he hadn't just landed there with the dragon. I need to let them know first, Loras. If they see her coming out of the sky, it'll create a panic. Let's save that for Robert. Jade said with a laugh, and Arthur smirked as they reached the gate. The banners had been called and answered, and he looked to see them ready to march, though one by one men stopped to look as Jay walked by. His armor marked him out, and though he held the helm in his hand, the crown he wore would leave no doubt. It was not Jon Snow who'd arrived here today, but Jaime Targaryen. Yet, in all of that, it was Ghost that most people focused on, the White Wolf adding to their number and looking like he was wearing his own white cloak to match his and Loras's. I've come to see my uncle. Is he in the keep? Jaxed one of the guards. Harwin, he believed the man was named if he was right. He's in the God's Wood with some of the other lords. Your Grace, the man said, and Jay nodded. Walking through the grounds, he imagined how impressive a sight they made. Jetty armored and crowned, Dark Sister on his hip with Ghost walling beside him at the other. Loras with his armor shined and glistening and his white cloak flowing behind him. Arthur with Dawn on his back, pinning his white cloak down. People bowed and nodded, and what had been a hive of activity when they entered was now almost at a standstill, and Arthur was glad to see the gates which led to the Godswood up ahead of them. Jon, a voice called out, and both he and Loras turned to see the young boy running towards the king. Bronn, I hope to see you, James said, smiling at his brother. Jon, father said. He said, You're the king now that you're Rhaegar's son, not his, Bran said. When he reached his brother, Arthur watching as Jay took a knee to be at his brother's height. May I wish to tell you myself, Bran, truly, I just never got the time I hoped for, Jay said sadly. Does this mean, are you not my brother now? Bran said, his voice barely a whisper. Do you wish me to be your brother? Jay asked, and the boy nodded vigorously. Then I'm your brother, now and always. He watched as the two embraced each other for a moment or two, Jay whispering something in Bran's ear, and the boy running off to where an older man stood. Arthur finding the way, he looked at the king troublesome until Jay explained it as they moved closer to the gate. The Blackfish, my brother's squiring for him, Jay said. Do you think him a danger? Loras asked. He's an honorable man, Jane said, and Arthur nodded as they walked into the Godswood itself. He didn't really have too many dealings with the Blackfish. The man had been a bit older than him and more a friend of Barristan's than his, but he was an honorable man, and while he'd no doubt take issue with J.A. over his family, any attack from him would be head-on and not from the back. As he looked at Ghost and watched J.A. give the White Wolf a nod, he saw J.A. smile when he saw him run off. 2 gray wolves soon coming into view along with the lords and Ned Stark. Your Grace, Ned Stark said as he saw Jane saw. Uncle, my lords, my lady, Jay said, and Arthur looked to the other lords. All in all, there were 8 people at the Weirwood, some he knew, Lord Wyman, the Great John and Lady Meg, and Lord Jorah, some he did not. A pale lord, a large gray-bearded man, and another younger man. Your Grace, most of them said once. They'd seen him and he watched as some went to take a knee. Jay, waving them to stand. We had not expected you, Your Grace, Ned said. I know, I felt I had to come, Uncle. No doubt there are questions about me, my plans, and our allies. It's better to address any concerns early, and there's something I wish you all to see. We'll go inside. I'll call a meeting of the lords and ladies, Ned said. Arthur saw as Ned and the others looked to the king's armor, to his bearing. As they looked at him and Loras and what they wore, Maegie's Mormont's eyes glistening when she saw Dawn on his back. While then, looking to see the sword J.J. carried, they walked from the Godswood, and as they were passing a wooden door, J.J. stopped, looking to it before turning to his uncle. Uncle, I'll pay my respects and meet you inside. Gier said, and Ned nodded, Arthur realizing now where they were going and feeling nervous about it. The statues they passed all held swords in their hands. Some were old, and as they walked, they quickly came to the 3 newest ones. He'd never met Rickard Stark, but he could see the family resemblance to his sons. Brandon, he had, and he felt the statue maker had done a decent job in creating his likeness. With Lyanna, though, he failed miserably, and the statue looked very little like her. It was lifeless, and she was anything but. He closed his eyes and said a small prayer, and when he opened them, J.U. was standing in front of the statue. Whatever Jag said was between him and Lyanna, and so he moved back and bid Loras do the same. Both of them watching while Jay whispered something before he reached under his armor and took out something soft and blue, laying it in the statue's hands. "I love you, Mother," he heard Jack say as he turned and they began to walk from the crypt. He and Loras walked behind him, and as he looked back, he saw the blue rose lying in Lyanna's hands, smiling as he realized that Jay had gotten one made that would never wilt. Arthur closed his eyes and made his own promise before they left. One he begged the gods that he would be able to keep for Rhaegar, for Lyanna, and for their son. River Run, 27 AC, Cat. Each day, it became even clearer just how desperate their situation was. Their main houses had abandoned them. Their largest bannermen weren't just not answering the call, but they had, if the scouts were to be believed, and she had no doubt they were, joined their banners to the Dragon One. Once again, she cursed Jon Snow, for that's who he was, as he was surely no dragon prince. He couldn't be, she'd have known if he was, and all his life he had shown himself to be anything but true. While she'd reluctantly accepted that he was in fact the son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark, she'd not accept they'd married. No. The boy was a bastard still. A Snow, though her mind screamed Blackfry to her, and her fears rose again. It was Daemon Blackfyre that she'd used in her mind as an example of why bastards couldn't be trusted, why they should be feared, and kept away from their true-born kin. That it turned out that Jon Snow was another black dragon didn't comfort her, or make her feel any better. Though it made her hate Ned, which was something that up to now she had not been able to do. He knew all the time, and while she'd originally felt shamed that he'd brought his bastard home, to her it was now even worse, as the truth was. He'd instead brought someone else's. "A raven from King's Landing," the maester said, and she shook her head and took it from him. "My brother?" she asked. "In the great hall with Lords Piper and Vance," the maester said. "Pearl, fetch my brother," she called out, and the girl ran off as the maester left her alone. She broke the seal and looked at the words on the scroll, and once again they brought her no comfort. "To the realm. We are well aware of the false dragon and the tales he's begun to spin. The lies he speaks, though, come not from his own lips, but from the lips of men who seek to usurp the rightful king. Men we'd once thought honorable like Ned Stark, who's willing to lie about the rape, kidnap, and murder of his sister by Rhaegar Targaryen. Men who refused to accept the just sentence carried out to an adulteress and the children she tried to pass off as trueborn, so as to steal the throne like Jaime Lannister. Men who seek to put their own blood on the throne at any cost like Mace Tyrell. These lies are well known to us, and we call them out for what they are. Jon Snow is the bastard son of Ned Stark, begat on a whore by a lust-filled man while we were on our campaign to seek justice for his father and brother. The campaign to rescue the king's beloved, whose name they now sully with their lies. Good men and women of Westeros, do not fall prey to these lies. Let the faith be your guide. The king marches to end this lie, this untruth. Join him and let truth win the day. Jon Arryn, hand of the king. Edmure arrived not long after she read the letter, and he smiled when he read it, though she had not. "I knew he could be no dragon. This will see his support fade away, Cat," Edmure said, and she looked at him wondering if actually believed his own words. "I doubt that. Even were the words in that scroll true, we'd still face the northwest and reach. Edmure, face them with most of our bannermen absent," she said. "But the letter, they'll come. Surely now they know," he said, his voice almost panicked. "Why? It changes nothing. Edmure, the odds remain the same, and we must do something to change them." "How many men have we got?" she asked. 6,000 in the garrison here," Edmure said. She began to do the sums. There were almost 12,000 men against them, though that wasn't including the Freys. Walder had perhaps 3, maybe 4,000 men at his call, and if they could bring those to bear, then perhaps they could at least match their own men. They could win back the Riverlands before the dragon bastards stole them from them completely. Though the price the old weasel would seek for his men would be a high one. "You need to march, Edmure. The king will come, and if we're here when he does, then he'll not take kindly to it," she said, and Edmure looked to her nervously. "March? Where?" he asked. "Against our enemies," she said, and Edmure looked cluelessly at her. "Cat? Those who've not answered the call, Edmure, we must bring them to our side. If they see an army at their gates, they'll come, and if you do this before the king arrives, then he'll see you as what you are, the right lord paramount for the Riverlands," she said. "Aye, I'll see it done. I'll speak to Mark, Hugo, and Lomond," he said, and Cat nodded as he ran from the room. The problem she had, though, was it wouldn't be enough. She knew, though, that they had to be seen to be doing something before Robert and Jon Arryn came, and more importantly than that, they had to be in a better position before the dragon came for them. She shuddered at the thought of it. The bastard would come. She knew he'd come, and the words he'd said in King's Landing played out in her head once more. Words in the wind, my lady. Words in the wind, that's what House Tully truly stands for. And just like words in the wind, your house too will soon be forgotten. She began to write out the message on the scroll, looking at it when she was done, and then walking hurriedly to the maester's rooms herself. Maester, to the twins, she said, and the maester nodded. Cacaud had staying to see the raven sent. The next few days were hectic, and the night before they were ready to march, she couldn't sleep, wondering if she was doing the right thing. Would it be best to wait for the raven's return? Wait for the answer, or should she wait until Jon Arryn came and use the hand to drive home their point? Would that make them look too weak? She thought it might, and if they wished to keep the Riverlands, they couldn't afford to be. Not that I'll let you keep the Riverlands, my lady. Your house will fall, as will your head. She shook the bastard's voice from her head. They had to fight or die, and she'd not leave this world until Jon Snow was dead. No matter what it took her having to do to see it done, the next morning after breaking their fast, she walked to the gates to bid Edmure farewell. Her brother was either projecting confidence he didn't possess, or truly he thought her plan would see his bannermen just simply fall into line. I'll show them, Cat. We'll be ready for the bastard when he comes. Edmure said, as they embraced. I know you will. Father would be so proud of you, Edmure. I'm so proud of you, she lied, as she kissed his cheek and waved him on. The days seemed to merge into each other, Cat spending her nights unable to sleep as her dreams tormented her. River run in flames, Edmure's head on a spike, and Cat being led to a block where the bastard waited for her. You did this. Had you been able to love a motherless child, then this would not be how your story ends, Ned said loudly. You are no mother of mine, Sansa said, turning away. Why mother? Robb said. I hate you. Arya's voice called out, her daughter's anger clear. I have a new mother now, Bran said as he stood beside Jirale. And so ends House Tully, the bastard said as the sword was raised in the air. She woke up screaming, her bed wet through from where she'd sweated through her nightclothes. Pearl and others rushed into her room, and she shouted at them to leave her alone, curling into a ball and hiding in the corner of the room after they'd left. She stayed there until morning, awake, tired, and scared out of her mind. Dressing that day and trying to put a brave face on, she was heading to the hall to eat, or to at least try to, when one of the servants came to her. My lady, there's a man to see you, a Lord Bykes, the servant said. She almost ran down the corridor to see if it was true, her heart racing and praying to the gods to let it be so. When she saw him, she almost cried right away, and forgetting propriety, appearances, or anything else, she hugged him and then wept against his shoulders. Patir, thank the seven you've come, she said through choking sobs. I'm here, Cat. I'm here. All will be well, he whispered, and Cat felt herself finally relax. Winterfell 2097 AC. Barbary Dustin. She'd heard like others that the king had arrived, the boy formerly known as Jon Snow, and who everyone now knew the truth of. Barbary had never believed the tale Ned Stark had spun and found it shocking that others had. Brandon having a bastard was something she expected. Her wild wolf was free, and though she loved him dearly, she knew he could never be hers. The boy, though, was nothing like Brandon from what she'd heard. Quiet, meek, almost a shadow, and so she had begun to question if she was mistaken. Only for him, then, to prove himself anything but what she'd thought. She had reveled in any piece of news she got about Jon Snow. She'd seen him improve the North and prove himself with a blade. After hearing how he'd put the fish in his place and called them out for what they are, she'd feasted the night she'd been told about that. Barbie was sure then she was right. He was Brandon's boy. All right, hearing the tale of the dire wolf, of how he'd brought them all back to Winterfell. Then of the fish being set aside, only making her more certain. Again, though, it seems she was wrong, even in her rightness. He wasn't Ned Stark's son, nor was he Brandon's. He was Lyanna's, and that made her feel somewhat conflicted. Lyanna was partly responsible for Brandon's death, though it was Rickard she blamed more for that. Jon Snow was now partly responsible for William's, though she blamed Ned for that truly. So where did that leave Jon Snow in her estimation? Something she wasn't sure of even when she rose and claimed him as her king. Daenerys, she called to her nephew. Aunt, he smiled as he sat beside her. You met the king before? Aye, more than once. He's a good man, Aunt, an interesting one. Her nephew said softly. How so? She asked. Dom, she said softly. I told you of Miranda and how I feel about her, he said, and she smiled. Her nephew had fallen completely for the girl. But Rosie had his sights set elsewhere. Aye, she said. We spoke in Highgarden, Aunt, the king and I, and again in Casterly Rock. He told me something. Something I found strange at the time, but it makes sense now, Daenerys said. What? She asked curiously. He said that while we may love our fathers and respect what they do for us or what they wish for us, they are not always the best judge of where our hearts lie. Their reasons for a match are not always our reasons for a match, and so why should we accept theirs and ignore our own? Dom said, smiling. Was that all? No, he said something else. He said, delay for whatever reason you can find to delay. For as long as you can delay. The world is ever-changing, and if I waited long enough, then I'd find that it may have changed for my benefit, Dom said, and she smiled. And you've waited? She asked. Aye, though it's getting hard to keep father from speaking to Rickard, he said. Wait a little longer, nephew. I'll speak to your father, she said, and chuckled when Dom kissed her cheek. They went to rise when the king walked in, but he waved his hand at them to sit, and she looked up as his two knights stood behind him. Her eyes focused on the Dornishman, and she wondered if it was his blade, which had killed William. Her attention was taken from him, though almost immediately once the king began to speak. My lords, my ladies, I have no doubt you have many questions, and I'll answer any you wish. Firstly, though, let me say this. I've come here because though most of you know me, you knew me false. You knew me not as who I was, truly, but as the mummer I was forced to be, the name I had no choice but to live under. I can understand that to some this will seem a betrayal, a falsity, and to those I can only apologize. My brother and sister were murdered, a babe not yet out of his cradle, and a 3-day-old girl. Rhaegar Clegane threw my brother so hard against the wall of his mother's room, it crushed his skull. He did so in front of his mother before he raped and killed her, my sister. My sister was stabbed 100 times, a 3-day-old girl, and that's what they did to her. And what was done to the man responsible, to the man who gave the orders? They were rewarded by a king who looked upon the bodies of a mother and her 2 children, who looked upon the bodies of my family and said that he saw no babes, only dragon spawn. The king said as he looked around the room. She watched as he leaned heavily on the table, his eyes glistening, as he turned to his uncle and placed a hand on his shoulder. So, my lords, tell me, was the lie a betrayal, a falsity? Or was it the work of an honorable man who wished to save his kin? She heard the murmurs around the room, and finally Robert Glover rose, surprising her that he'd have the nerve to be the one. I'll accept the lie, your grace. However, you carry the blood of Aerys in your veins. How are we to know for sure that you won't, just like him, turn out to be another mad king? Ruby said to loud yells, and a move from the Dornish knight, which the king stopped. I also carry my father's blood, Lord Glover. Was he mad? I carry my mother's blood, she. I carry Aensid's blood in me. I also carry Richie. It's my great-grandfather, and Aegon, the Unlikelies, too. I carry the Conciliators and Aensians, but I'm not just one side of my blood, am I? I carry Rickard Starks, Criggans, and Torrens, Roderick's, and Brandon's. I am both, and I'm none. For as much as we are our families, we're ourselves too, and I stand before you as you see me, a man not yet fully grown, but a man all the same. The king said, and she heard the voices of approval, Your Grace, our allies? Wyman asked, and she would have bet that he'd be the one to change the subject. Aye, my lord, the West marches as we speak, under Lord Jaime Lannister's command. The Reach is marshaled too, and I believe they've marched. House Hightower has marched for sure, though I must travel there, from here to be certain. Dorne has marched under Prince Oberyn. Martell and the Lords of the Narrow Sea have taken Dragonstone, the king said to cheers. Darn your grace, Rosier said. As I said, my lord, I am not just one part of my family. My sister, my brother, and their mother's kin have risen for me. The king said, and she heard men speak of numbers and how they had them now. You can be sure of the Reach, your grace. Roderick asked, and she looked to her father to see if she could judge his mind. Lady Margaery is my wife, my lord. We married in front of my gods at the Weirwood in Highgarden and are to wed in front of hers when we have the chance. Lady Olenna has given me her word, and Randall Tarley has knelt and pledged to me the Reach will rise. The king said. She smiled at that, as did a lot of others in the room. That he was married already would stop the inevitable maneuvering, trying to make a match with him. That he'd done it in front of the old gods. Only showed him for a true son of the North. My lords, I came here to answer your questions, and to show you something. I ask you to join me outside, the king said, walking from the room. She, like the others, wondered what it could be that he wished to show them, and so she moved quickly to the door, eager to be outside and to see whatever it was for herself. It took some time for them all to gather, and she, like the others, could see nothing in the king's hand. There was also nothing being brought to him as he walked out with the White Wolf by his side. As I said when Lord Glover asked, I am not just one side of my family. Ghost here is a gift from the old gods, the living, breathing sigil of my mother's house. He's not the only gift I was given, my lords, my ladies, if you'll look above. She turned her head and looked to the sky and saw nothing for a few moments. Then the shape moved towards them. It was larger than a bird, much larger, by the gods it couldn't be, she thought, as it flew out of the clouds. It was white, and its wings the brightest blue she'd ever seen. The shadow it cast was huge as it flew over them. She turned and looked as it turned back, and the flames it shot from its mouth quickly covered the sky. Rosearts, my lords, my dragon, the king said to loud cheers, and some nervous faces. Highgarden 2097 AC. Marguerite! She had arrived back to a much different Highgarden. Row upon row of tents surrounded the town, and she had never seen so many men armed in her life. That she was accompanied by her uncle leading her grandfather's own army, only adding to it. When her grandmother saw her and Sansa, Marguerite could see her relief on her face, that they were safe, well, and home. Being her greatest concern, she confided in her later that night. Her father was in his element, and he threw yet another feast, his sixth. Her grandmother quickly informed her she was asked to sit front and center, as befitting the future queen. And though she did as she was bid, she found the extra guards and attention to be annoying. Each day, the lords would meet, and her grandmother would come back more and more frustrated, until finally Marguerite could take it no more. Grandmother, what is it? What's wrong? She asked, as they sat in the garden. You're a fool of a father. He wishes orders to march. Speaks of sieges and taking keeps, and yet has he moved? Has he marched? Her grandmother said, her annoyance clear. Do we have a plan, grandmother? She asked, having no true knowledge of war. Roan and Tarley do, and yet your father is risking the favor we have gained by once again inserting himself where he doesn't belong. But surely as lord he must, she asked. Must he? He sat outside Storm's End while Rhaegar fell. You think I'll allow him to do the same to Jaehaerys? Her grandmother said, and Marguerite gasped. Oh, my sweet child, forgive me. Forgive the ranting of an old woman. Jaehaerys will not fall. He has something his father doesn't have. He has dragons, and we have the men Marguerite. We will be triumphant, and you will be queen. Her grandmother said, and she nodded, worried though she was. She was glad to be in her room that night, taking the glass candle from the chest. She waited for it to light up, and felt her relief when it did. Jaxier, are you there? She asked. Oh, AJ is it? Now he japed back. Gods, I'm trying my best, Jon. She said, her annoyance clear. Marge, what's wrong? I was jesting, you know that, right? He said, and she sighed, annoyed at herself. Now, I know Jackson and I was trying to get used to calling you that, so I didn't call you Jon in public, she said. Oh, sorry, there's more though, Marge, isn't there? He asked. It's father, his grandmother thinks. That he's going to make the same mistakes he made in the rebellion, he said, and she smiled. Glad he figured it out and she'd not had to say it aloud. Aye, she said, and there was silence for a moment or two before Jay spoke again. Have the lords lined up on the west balcony 2 days from now, Marge? All of them, your father included. Why? You really think I was ready to go to war without seeing you? He said, and she felt her heart beat a little faster. You're coming here? She asked, just to make sure. Fine, 2 days from now. Marge, noon, he said. Noon. I love you, Jane said, and she smiled. I love you too. She told her grandmother when they broke their fast the next day, and was relieved to see her relax. Later, when she told Sansa her friend seemed a little subdued, but Willis explained it was the war itself that had Sansa that way. Her mother told her not to tell her father otherwise. He'd go out of his mind with planning the biggest feast yet, and so she kept him out of the loop for now. That day and night seemed never-ending, and even when she broke her fast the next morning, she felt as if time barely moved. Soon enough, though, she was heading to the balcony along with her grandmother and their guards. Sansa and Fang walked with Willis, while Garland escorted their mother, her father speaking to Lord Ashford and her uncle Balor as they moved in front of them. "I have no idea why we're doing this. It's most odd," she heard her father say. "Indeed? Well, no doubt we should find out soon enough," her uncle answered. As they stood on the balcony, it was Fang who noticed first, the wolf directing Sansa to the sight in the sky, her friend pointing it out to her, and she looked to the distance to see the shape coming towards them. Soon others began to notice, and she saw more and more point at the white shape, the voices rising as people's attention was drawn to the dragon as she flew towards them. "Is that— It can't be! It's a dragon," she heard someone exclaim. She smiled when she looked out as the dragon flew closer. Up front, wearing armor she'd never seen the like of before. Could only be Jaya. Behind him 2 men wore white cloaks, and as she looked closer she wondered what the shape was in front of him. "Ghost? He's brought ghosts," he heard Sansa say with a giggle. As the dragon flew closer, she and the others could see just how large she was now. She was as big as the balcony they stood on, and she was magnificent. Her eyes and the eyes of everyone looked up as she flew overhead, the dragon seeming to take an age to fly from their view. "Come, it's time we met our king," her grandmother said, and she watched as lords began to move quickly, each one eager to grab the choicest slot to meet the king first. "The king, but we're not ready," her father said, as he hurriedly moved and Marguerite tried her best not to laugh as she too hurried to meet with Jay. Winterfell, Highgarden, 2097 AC. Yaxley Targaryen. After the Lords of the North saw Roderick's things began to move quickly. When he told him about Logoran too, and that his uncle rode him, it created so many questions that he wished he'd kept it to himself. Still, it allowed for him to move straight to what he wished to do, which was to listen in on the North's plan for battle. Explaining some of what the others would be doing and then moving on to their plans quickly. Prince Oberyn will move into the Stormlands along with the Reach forces, while the West will march to the Riverlands to meet up with the River Lords and to cut Robert off from joining up with the Knights of the Vale. He began as he pointed to the map. "You want us to meet you in the Riverlands?" his uncle asked. "No, I want you to march to here." He pointed to the crossroads. "The Knights of the Vale just need to be delayed long enough for the Western army under my uncle to join you," he said. "With his dragon?" Maggie asked. "I, Robert, and Jon Arryn have the main forces. Stannis will lead the Storm Lords and try and join up with them. If they can unite, then this is a different war, but we outnumber them separately as we do together. If we can keep them apart, then perhaps we can win this with far less bloodshed," he said. "You really think there won't be bloodshed here, Your Grace?" Wyman said. "I'd like to shed as little as I can, which is why the dragons aren't to be used in a full-on attack," he said to Nods. "So no fields of fire," Rickard Karstark said, almost dismissively. "If it needs to be done, then it'll be done, my lord. If I think I'm putting too many lives at risk, or if we by some twist of fate find ourselves in trouble, then my uncle and I are both prepared to do what is necessary to save our allies' lives, even at the cost of many of our enemies. But when all is said and done, I intend to be king of all of Westeros, and not just those who rose for me. Burning fathers, sons, brothers, my family has done enough of that already. Forgive me for not wanting to make it my first choice," he said, and saw some of the men look to him in agreement, though Roose Bolton seemed like he didn't agree. After the lords left, he stood in the room with his uncle, noticing the worried look on his face. "Uncle?" he asked, concerned. He'd said something to push him away from him. "What? Sorry. I was thinking this is a good plan, Your Grace. An excellent one. I wish it didn't have to be done, but it must, and this is the best way forward," his uncle said. "Thank you, Uncle. I'll leave on the morrow," he said. "Talk to them, Your Grace, the lords. The Blackfish will seek reassurance over his kin, and others will wish to speak. Talk to them before you leave." "Uncle, Lady Catelyn—" "I know, you made it clear. I'm with you, Your Grace, all the way," his uncle said as he reached out and touched his Georda's shoulder, and Jay felt glad of both the reassurance and the touch. He spoke to Wyman the Great and Smozians, and to Megan Jorah, to Rickard Karstark, and even Roose Bolton, though it was his son he spoke to for longer, Domeric listening carefully to what he said. As he walked to the sparring yard, he saw Bran and the Blackfish walking his way, and he looked to Loras and nodded, his friend laughing as they then moved a little quicker. Jon, are you sparring? Bran said before holding a hand to his mouth. Sorry, your grace. Aye, brother, I am, he said, seeing the excitement rise on his brother's face. He and Loras drew their swords, and he heard the gasp when Bran saw Dark Sister. Soon they were moving, and though he stretched it out, Loras yielded quickly enough. Seeing the crowd that had built up around them, Jay looked to Arthur and gave him a nod, the knight smirking as he pulled his sword. The gasps around the yard when seeing Dawn were only silenced when Arthur stood across from him, people pointing to the two swords and the whispers of their names being heard in the wind. To 5 or a yield, sir, Jade said. Aye, your grace, Arthur replied. Dark Sister was thin and a long sword that, from the moment he'd wielded it, Jade had felt it belonged in his hand. Dawn to Arthur, he knew, felt the same, though it was a great sword, which meant that Arthur had the greater reach. For Jay, it was quickness and movement, unconventional attacks and spins, and he readied himself to give his all, knowing he'd need to just to keep up. The first clash of swords reverberated around the yard, and the sound was otherworldly. Jashar moved and dodged, and the armor on his back now felt a part of him, just like the sword itself. Both were lighter than normal steel, and so much stronger. It had taken him no time at all to get used to the slightly extra weight, and to his relief he found it no barrier to his movements. He thrust and Arthur parried, he spun and Arthur was there waiting for him. The dance going on for far longer than it had with Loras before Arthur took the first and second points. As the knight moved away, though Jay moved towards him, the feint causing Arthur to ready to parry a blow which never came. Instead, Jay rolled and was behind him, taking a point while Arthur readjusted his feet. It was to be his only one, as though he had made the night work. He lost the next two, and soon yielded to the last. Well, at least I got one today, he said to Laughs. Hey, you're getting better, your grace, Arthur said with a smile on his face. That was incredible, Jane, your grace, Bran said, and Jane was about to ask his brother to spar when he saw how the Blackfish was looking at him. Bran, why don't you speak to Sir Arthur? Sir Brendan? A word? He said. The knight nodded. Arthur looking at him while he shook his head and called Ghost to him, walking with the older knight to a quieter part of the yard. Loras stood behind him, and he hadn't left Arthur's view. But he knew he could go no further or the knight himself would follow, and the look on his brother's face as he talked to Arthur made him smile a little. You have questions, Sir Brendan. My house will be stripped of its Lord Paramount position, and your name will end, he said simply. Edmure. Death, he said, without looking at the man. Lysa, he asked. You asked the wrong man, Sir Brendan. Your sister was arrested and charged with adultery by Jon Arryn. She and her son are prisoners, he said. What? You lie, the Blackfish said, moving towards him. Jexel raising his hand to stop Loras moving. For what reason would I? You know my feelings on your house. And I rise against Jon Arryn anyway. What care I what you think of the man? You'll not fight for me no matter what the reasons are, he said, and saw the man almost nod. Cat is my sibling's mother. I'd not see her harmed, but she'll end her days far from my sight, he said, and Brendan nodded. Nud says you plan to make Bran Lord of Riverrun. Aye, but as a Stark, he said, walking away. After speaking briefly to Bran, he and his Kingsguard walked to the God's Wood, and Jay knelt before the tree, praying to the old gods that those he cared for didn't come to harm. Hearing Arthur turn, he stood up to see a gray-haired, tall, thin woman walk towards him. It took him a moment to see the sigil and recognize the long axes and the crown that was stitched to her side. Lady Dustin, he said as he rose. Your grace, she said, looking back at him. You have her look, to be sure, some of her temperament, too. In another life I could have been your good aunt. But alas, it was not to be. This is the only life we could have met, my lady, he said, and she looked at him before nodding. Was it you, Sir Arthur? Was it you who struck my William down? She asked, and Arthur nodded. I protected my king, my lady. Your husband fought well, as did the others, though I can say with all truth that I cannot differentiate one from the other. I lost my brothers that day, and I care not to think about it, Arthur said sadly. Is he worth it, Sir Arthur, the lives that were lost? Do you think him truly worth theirs? There are many lives I'd give mine own for my lady. None worth so much as the king I now serve, Arthur said, and Jay felt himself gulp as he looked at them. My nephew says you promised him his happiness, your grace. You may consider that payment for my husband's life. For now my men are yours. On payment of that debt you have my fealty too, and the past will then remain where it belongs, Barby said, walking away. He spoke to Margaery that night and flew the next morning saying his goodbyes to his uncle as he did so. Soon they were over the west and he landed near the crag. After eating and resting, they then took to the air once more. Below him, armies rode and marched, and he wondered if the war had yet begun. Jane felt his heart beat a little faster when he entered the Reach, and soon they were flying over Red Lake and Golden Grove, before finally seeing Highgarden itself. Rosierdix flew over the keep, and he looked down to see the men lined up, although his eyes as always were on her, and he wished she could see his smile behind his helm. They landed not too far away, and after speaking to Rosierdix and telling her to find food and a place to stay, he walked toward the castle with a spring in his step, one that did not go unnoticed by Arthur and Loras. Eager to get there, your grace, Lorsied. Yea, Lors I am. Try and keep up, he said, laughing. When Ghost raced on ahead of him, it seems none of us will beat him, your grace, Arthur said. Jaxtus smiled. Ghost would see Margaery and feel her touch before he would, though he could not begrudge the wolf that he only wished he could stay here longer than he was intending. But he knew he could not. The war waited for none of them, and unlike Mace, he'd not dawdle. There were many more miles to travel. And soon enough it'd be west he aimed for, and a stag that would be in his sights. Stonehenge 2097 AC. Jatinos. He called his banners after the ravens came. Once the message came from Shella, he knew he had no choice but to pledge his support to the true king. That he'd not rise for Edmure, Tully had been a given, but he had been prepared to leave it at that. Until the Raven came, claiming Jon Snow to not be who he thought he was, but the son of Rhaegar Targaryen forced him to reconsider. The truth after that was easy to discern. Ned Stark had lied to protect his kin, and now the boy was going for the throne. Working out that he'd win wasn't too hard either, and yet he still hesitated. His location demanded it, should Robert arrive first, and he was flying dragon banners, then his house would suffer. Then the Raven came for Shella. She was raising her banners for the dragon, as was Mallister, Mooten, Darry, and Blackwood. The last giving him almost a reason to pause once more, though in the end he knew what he must do, and so the dragon banner now flew over his keep. My lord, forces arrive from the west, Harry said. Friendly? He asked his bastard son. I doubt it, my lord. The silver trout, Harry said, and he readied himself, glad at least it was Edmure and not Robert who had come. He climbed his tower and with a Myrish eye he looked out, watching as the army arrived. It shocked him that Edmure had managed to gather so many, and it made his own force look pitiful in comparison. Though he was glad there were no siege engines amongst Edmure's supplies. With time they could be built, but time helped him. Walking from the tower he asked for the horses to be readied, and a flag of parley to be presented. It took some time for the answer to come back from Edmure, and when it did, Jonos ready to ride out. He had to force Harry to stay alongside Hendry, telling them he needed his kin here just in case. He didn't expect them to break parley, but he put nothing past Tully. His actions towards the king proved his mind wasn't clear where Jacria's was concerned. Riding out to meet them, he looked to see House Piper, Vance, Goodbrook, and Rhaegar, and not many more had joined with Edmure, leaving him far worse off than he should have been. Lord Bracken, I sent the Raven and called you to arms, and yet you did not answer, Edmure said when he met him in his hastily arranged tent. I did not for you serve a false king, my lord, and I've pledged my sword to the true one. A bastard. You pledged yourself to a bastard. Edmure laughed as around him. The lord smiled. Did I better than a monster, my lord, he said, and the smile stopped. Your liege lord called, and you refused. That makes you a traitor, Jonaso, Mark Piper said. Or my king called, and you refused, making you one mark. Only the victorious get to write this story. Are you sure the side you serve will be the ones to win? He said, smiling. King Robert put down the dragons once before, Lymond said. When he brought more of the Riverlands and had Ned Stark on his side, Lymond, here the odds are not in his favor, he said, and Edmure looked at him angrily. A side led by a bastard, a green boy. Edmure said, and Jonas couldn't help but chuckle. That very same green boy has knocked you on your arse more than once, but by all means try your luck once more, my lord. The west, the reach, the north, I'm sure will look forward to proving the green boy true. So you will not rise? Edmure asked. I've risen, my lord. Just not for you, he said with a smirk. Then we'll see you on the morrow, Edmure said, and Jonos sighed as he turned to walk from the tent, stopping to look back at the other lords, men he'd called friend before this day. He fights because he's been fool enough to poke the dragon. He has no choice, he said, pointing to Edmure. The rest of you should know better. He heard the grumbling as he readied his horse, and then he quickly rode back. The villagers had taken refuge in the keep, and his men had built barricades to try and stop the advance, though he knew it was no use, and he only hoped that Edmure wouldn't be cruel enough to burn the village to the ground. Every able man had a weapon in his hand, and he readied for the attack on the morrow. It came earlier than he thought, and the fighting through the village was fierce. Soon, though, he looked on as the forces began to surround his keep. Janos looked to his men, his kin, and readied himself for the attack on Stonehenge itself. When the horns came, he was stunned, though not as much as the men who were setting up their tents waiting for the siege to begin. He saw men fall and horses race off. Saw men run, and as he looked through the marish eye, he could barely believe it. Those are Blackwood men, he said, and for the first time ever he found himself happy to say those words. Aye, but on whose side, Hendry? His nephew asked. He didn't need to answer, though, as their actions were doing that, and though they didn't aim to rout the forces below them, didn't chase after them, or didn't seek to kill them all. The day was theirs all the same. The attack had been completely unexpected, and Edmure had been caught with his pants down, literally according to songs that were sung later that night. Janos watched as the army that had come to take his home from him was chased off his lands. Tents, horses, armor, some were carried off with them, and yet most had been left behind, and in that their victory was complete. Morale-wise, even more so, as his men cheered, and he could only imagine the dejection those on Edmure's side must have felt. As he made his way to the gate, he prepared to let Tytos Blackwood into his home for the first time ever. He'd even feast the man tonight if he'd break bread with him. Jonas, Tytos said. Tytos, he replied. I'd not expected you. I must say, aye, we have our differences, but they're for another day. My king sent me here, Janos, and so here I've come, Tytos said. You spoke to him? He asked, wondering where the king was. No, I received a message from a dead man telling me Tully marched here, Tytos said with a laugh. A dead man? Sir Richard Lonmouth lives and is at the king's side. Jonas, it seems more of Rhaegar's old guard survived too, as Sir Arthur Dane guards the king's back. The sword of the morning, he said almost in a whisper. Hey, help is on the way, Janos. The king's men march and we're to meet them at River Run. Ha, good. Tully tried to take my home from me. I'll be glad to help the king take his, he said, laughing loudly. He left a force to garrison the keep, and he rode with Tytos and his men, told along the way that the Lannisters along with others would soon be joining them, and they'd meet with the lions soon enough. Looking back at Stonehenge in the distance and then at the man he rode beside, he shook his head and began to laugh. What's so funny, Jan Satztaxed? All my life I worried it'd be you who took Stonehenge from me. Tytos, little did I know that I'd see a king in my time who'd prove me wrong, he said, and Tytos laughed a little. Aye, now let's go gut some fishes.